Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Breber, and alongside me is Logan Camden, and here we are. Look at us, moving, living, breathing. The moving pictures are back, and today we are back with another all-time ranking. We are going to be ranking the top 10 offensive peaks in NBA history. We've done the top 10 scorers. We've done the top 10 passers. We've done the top 10 shooters. We haven't done the top 10 screeners yet. Maybe that's somewhere down the line. But today we're putting it all together into that all-encompassing offensive value. Logan, with that being said, let's start by establishing our criteria. What is yours for this list?
For me, we are ranking the offensive peaks. I am looking at a 3 to 4 season peak for all of these guys. Scoring and playmaking are involved. They're probably the two most important components, but it's not the be-all, end-all. I am going to value scoring, I think, slightly more. I think that's the most important thing in your offensive arsenal, but it's also other subtle things that involve a team offense. It's your complete offensive value and how you leverage and translate those traits and skills into great team offensive results. As always, I think it's important to mention at the top, we are judging these guys relative to era. You can't hold modern skill sets against 1980s and 1970s guys. I'm not going to get on a big man in the 70s for not being able to knock down a three. It just doesn't make sense. So we are judging these guys relative to era, but it's your complete offensive value, and I feel like I say this every episode, but damn, man, there's so many guys that I want to get on this list that just are not going to be able to make it. Like, there's legitimately 3 to 5 guys that when I started making this list, I was 100% convinced in my head that we're all going to be locks for this list, and I had to omit them. So I just feel bad, man. There are some all-time legends and greats that I'm going to have to cut loose.
That 10 spot, dude, I considered so many guys, and we do this every episode, right? We spend the better part of an hour just on the honorable mentions, and frankly, it's maybe my favorite part of all these episodes. This one, as brutal as any, we will get to those in a second. My criteria, though, is simple. It's my top 10 players to build an offense around at their peaks. It is that total offensive value in your best 3 to 5 year stretch. When we talk about that value, I do put it in the context of a championship ceiling. Like, how much offensive value are you providing if we are trying to reach the highest heights of NBA offense? What I mean by that is I'm going to value somebody who takes me on that leap from solid offense to elite offense with their presence, more so than somebody who can get me from bad offense to above average offense, right? It is that ceiling raiser versus floor raiser dynamic. The extreme example I would use of a floor raiser would be like 2017 Russell Westbrook, somebody who through sheer volume was able to really pick up a very untalented offensive group around him and get them to solid offensive results when he was on the court. But ultimately, there are some flaws in his game when it comes to high turnover numbers, extreme ball dominance, low scoring efficiency, all these things that make his play style and his skill set much less conducive to reaching the highest heights of team offense as the leading guy. So I want those players who deliver that total value when it comes to championship level offense, truly elite NBA offense. And my criteria in terms of statistics, numbers that we're going to be using, I am still bringing back the league efficiency adjusted points per 75 possessions as my scoring measure because I tabulated all those numbers for the top 10 scores episode. I do think that it is the best possible adjustment for differences in pace and efficiency across eras. I'm not going to break down the entire metric because we already did that in the top 10 scores episode, but I'm going to be referring to that again. And in terms of all other numbers, I'm going to mention everybody's assists, offensive rebounds, and turnovers per 75 possessions. That's just to adjust for the differences in pace and minutes played. That's why I'm going per 75 possessions. And I'm going to mention all of those numbers to emphasize some of the offensive value that you can deliver on the margins that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Often when people think about offensive players, they just go scoring plus playmaking, right? Oh, you're a 9 out of 10 scorer, you're a 9 out of 10 passer. That's how good you are as an offensive player, but that's really not how it works. Offensive rebounding rebounding is a way to deliver value on the margins. Keeping turnovers low is a way to deliver value for your team in the possession game. Some guys really stand out in those categories, and I do think they deserve to be rewarded for that because that is part of your total offensive value, your ability to deliver value without the basketball in terms of offensive rebounding, your ability to be an efficient offensive player in a way we don't often give enough credit when it comes to keeping turnovers low. And so all these things come together in terms of my criteria. And like you said, as always, we are judging these players relative to era. So with that all being said, Logan, let's get into the honorable mentions. Who was your toughest cut?
I debated even all the way up to us starting this episode on who was going to be in my 10 spot and who I was going to go with. And this was definitely my toughest cut. I've gone to bat a million times on this pod for this guy. I think the first guy I have to leave off is Larry Bird. And it
no
really,
Larry Bird in my 10 spot?
I think it really pains me to say that, but it kind of goes back to another thing. And I'm glad you mentioned it when you were talking about your criteria, like starting an offense. And I love Larry. I think Larry, we always talk about how malleable and how you could drop him into any offensive situation in any era and he would thrive. And like, while that rings true, I just look at other guys on this list where I'm starting at a baseline point and I'd rather have those guys to lead my offense and to start out my team. I think you could put Larry with superstars and he would make everybody around him better, and he would still get his. I think you could put Larry among plumbers, and he would make everybody better, and he would still get his. But there's just a difference of confidence that I have in guys that I can literally just put the ball in their hands, and they're going to hunt me a bucket. They're going to get to their spot. They're going to maximize their teammates just a little bit more, or certain guys have just a little bit more gravity. Like, I love a lot of the traits that Larry has, the shooting touch, the feel, the off-ball movement, a lot of the subtleties. But when I look at, again, starting from a blank slate, there are just 10 guys, literally just 10 guys that I think I'd rather have a little bit more than Larry. And, like, I was certain that he was going to end up somewhere in this 8 to 10 range, and I think I just land with him at my number 11 spot.
So this is maybe a difference in criteria. What I do love about Larry's offense so much is that ceiling raising. It is that versatility, that ability to fit in alongside just so many different types of different players, guys who do need the ball in their hands. This is a guy who was a natural power forward and yet played small forward for a vast majority of his career and was utterly dominant at that position. Like, Larry, to me, is just a supreme example of somebody who, with his incredible feel, who with his offensive versatility, can slot into any offense and make it substantially better. Is he a top 10 floor raiser offensively in NBA history? Probably not, just because there are limitations in terms of on-ball scoring volume when you're just talking about picking up the slack for a group, but also when you stress a defense every possession with your off-ball movement and the threat of your shooting and what you can do as a quick touch passer in all the different areas on the floor from which you can pick a defense apart, that has a massive, massive offensive impact, not just when it comes to, hey, let's take this unit from solid to elite, which Larry excelled at, but also rookie Larry Bird, not even in his peak years, took an offense that had been bottom 3 in the NBA before he joined the team, really had minimal personnel changes, and then they were the number 2 offense in basketball his rookie season. It's one of the greatest single season turnarounds ever, and the overwhelming driving factor in that was the presence of Larry Bird and what he did for that offense. So he has some superpowers that I value a lot. Ironically, I guess I'm lower on Larry as a scorer than you, or I'm higher on him as an offensive player. He is on my list. My toughest cut, I don't even know who I want to single out. I guess I'll just start with my beloved baby boy, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, because I really wanted to get him on this list. And I think that 2026 Shai absolutely would be on this list. Like, the level he is playing at this very moment, where he's giving you such preposterous scoring volume at like plus 9% relative true shooting, while keeping turnovers lower than any other player in NBA history with the sort of volume that he has. Just the ridiculous on-ball versatility and efficiency, underrated playmaking value, I would argue, especially considering how much he bends the defense towards him because of his scoring threat. What he can do as one of the all-time great intermediate scorers, having maybe the highest scoring floor in NBA history, at least in the regular season. There's so much that is so incredible about Shai. Ultimately, I think over the totality of this 3-year run, though, what's tricky is he's leveled up each one of these years. So this season, the value is there at a top 10 level. Is it overall over the 3-year span? When you consider that the postseason performance hasn't quite been up to his regular season standard, I had to leave him just off. However, I will mention another metric that I'm going to refer to for all the guys for whom we have this data, so everybody to play in the 21st century. When we talk about offensive impact, we do have data that measures that. Not perfectly, but if you look at offensive on-off and the levels of team offense that your squad was reaching when you were on the floor, Shai with a plus 8.5 offensive on-off swing, leading his team to a plus 7 relative offense when he's on the court. Really remarkable. I do think the load on his plate is absolutely massive for that OKC team, and he does a great job. It does come down to, in the playoffs, even true shooting percentage, 27.3 league adjusted points per 75. So a 4-point drop off, a 6+% drop off in true shooting percentage. That's why I just had to leave him off. But I would bet that he ends up being on this list. And with a dominant playoff run this very year, I think he can get there because he is so ridiculous as a scorer with the volume efficiency combo we've seen this regular season.
No comment.
All right.
My next guy that I have left off is another throwback legend. This one a little further back. I also thought he was going to be a lock for my list. I have 1963 to 1965 Oscar Robertson just off of my list. And Oscar's routinely leading out elite offense after elite offense. I mean, he's giving you 30 points and 11 assists per game in the regular season over this stretch on 49.3% from the field. And then in the playoffs is also giving you 30 points and 9 assists per game with 12.3 free throw attempts per game. Really, there's only one reason why the Big O isn't on my list, and it's there are two guys that I would have gone with Larry over the Big O because of the flexibility that I get with him, and there's just one guy from Oscar's era that I prefer over him, really. That's the only reason. So Larry and Oscar, man, and the next guy, and another throwback player. All these guys were tough omissions. I thought Oscar, with how elite the offenses that he was churning out in the regular season, every single year we're going to get him on my list. Again, playoff effectiveness goes down a little bit, and I think there are a couple of guys from his era that I prefer just over him.
See, that's where you lose me. I definitely think that Oscar is the best offensive player of his era. What I think is the argument against Oscar being on this list, which I did consider, is an individual offensive player was just less valuable in the 60s than in any period since. We are judging value relative to era, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have two offensive players from this decade, two offensive players from that decade, because if you look at the most valuable individual player in the 1960s, it was far and away the greatest defensive player of all time and of that era, Bill Russell, because pre-3-point line, there was just a level of impact that you could reach as a dominant rim protector that no offensive player could reach. And what's interesting is, if you look at the Royals offenses that Oscar's leading, they're number one in terms of being the best offense in the league, like every year, 5 straight years to start his career. But I went through and I pulled the top 60 relative offenses since 1960. I did this with a lot of help from playbyplay.com, which already has all of these numbers for the play-by-play era, but I went back all the way to 1960, and interestingly, even though he's leading 5 number one offenses in 5 years, not a single one of them is a top 60 relative offense since 1960. So a number one offense at that time was not separating from the field as much as a number one offense today, or as much as the number one defenses were separating from the field, because the 60s Celtics have all of the best relative defenses in NBA history. So I do think he's the best offensive player of the 60s. I do have Oscar on my list. I am very high on him, but just that interesting point about offense not being as valuable, the truly great defenses and defensive players being the more dominant forces at that time in NBA history, I do think is an interesting case to make against Oscar Robertson. I think maybe you're going to have this guy on your list if we're talking about players from the 60s. I left off Wilt Chamberlain from 1966 to 1968. Ooh, interesting.
Only reason I didn't, and I think this is interesting, it's kind of interrelated with a point you just made. we did our top 10 player peaks in totality, and I had Wilt very high on that list. And the reason is because in totality, in that era, I think rebounding and defense were so important that it's like Wilt actually brings in together just a complete case of utter dominance over this 2 to 3 year stretch. Immaculate scoring value, immaculate playmaking value, but I'd say his biggest advantages are how important being that defensive anchor and rebounder was in this era. And I'm not really it's his top 10 offensive peaks. It's not just in totality. So I think when you're looking at his resume, everything included, he would be up higher. But if we're just looking at it offensively, I don't think he belongs. And also, the other thing is just he didn't do it long enough to where I can go, oh, yeah, Wilt was spanking people. If this 2-year stretch where he really peaks was 4 to 5 seasons, I think Wilt would be on this list for me.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you just said, and particularly the point about all-around impact and value, because, of course, everybody thinks of Wilt as this offensive juggernaut and the 50 points per game and the 24, 24, and 8 season that he has, and 67 and 68, leading the league in total assists. But I do think there's a real argument that at his best, he was a more valuable defensive player than offensive player. And I think they were at least essentially equal in terms of value. Like at this time, what makes Wilt so special overall is 1967, he leads a number 1 offense. 1968, he leads a number 1 defense. Like it really was that supreme two-way impact with his ridiculous physical tools defensively, being just more engaged defensively at this point than he was earlier in his career. And then offensively, the reason that we go with these years from Wilt, the Sixers years, not the Warriors years when he was putting up his gaudiest scoring numbers, is because this is when he really figured out how to max out his offensive impact when he's averaging 50 points per game. First of all, there's context that's needed in terms of the crazy pace where he's out there for 130 possessions a game that makes the volume less impressive than it seems at face value. But the real significant flaw with those years from Wilt is that he was the most selfish player in NBA history. And so regardless of how gifted a scorer you are, you diminish your offensive effectiveness when you never pass the basketball. And that is very much proven by the fact that the Warriors had super middling offensive results at that time. It's these years, especially 1967, and also 1968, just not quite as much so, where Wilt is operating as such an efficient offensive hub. His scoring efficiency goes through the roof as his volume goes down. His playmaking value skyrockets. He dials the passing way up, and he does lead in 1967 the best relative offense of the 60s. Like 1967 Wilt would be here for me because he is giving you this elite playmaking value, and he's scoring so efficiently, like plus 14 relative true shooting that season. Unbelievable. But if you look at the other 2 seasons in this 3-year stretch, 66, he still hadn't quite struck the right balance of scoring, playmaking. He was close, but that offense was still mediocre. And then 1968, like, he just doesn't have as good a finishing season, and his free throw shooting is atrocious to the point where his efficiency takes a significant dive from where it was at in 1967. And his scoring volume was deliberately lowered at this time when you do make the adjustments for pace, but then he does get a boost with my metric because the NBA was so much less efficient at his time. Still, in the regular season, 18.9 league adjusted points per 75 on plus 8% relative true shooting, so really good efficiency. In the playoffs, though, 15.9 league adjusted points per 75 on just plus 3% relative true shooting. And at this time, leading overall just a plus 2 relative offense over these 3 years. So again, the 67 season, absolutely one of the greatest offensive seasons ever. I would say a top 3 individual season in NBA history. But like you said, the totality of this span is just not quite there. And again, offensive players just were not as valuable in the 60s.
Yeah, Wilt was one of my first 6 guys off my list. The next guy off for me has been compared to Wilt Chamberlain before, and that's Giannis Antetokounmpo. Giannis was a tough cut for me. I mean, the numbers are ridiculous. If you look at him from 2023 to 2026, the guy's giving you 30 points, 6 assists on 63.2% true shooting with 11 free throw attempts per game. With Giannis, I think it goes into a couple of the dynamics that you were talking about, one with ceiling versus floor raising, where Giannis is arguably one of the greatest floor raisers, I think, in NBA history. Like his gravity, his rim pressure, and now like Giannis has actually added some intermediate touch shot making. I really think he's peaking offensively now. Like he's slowly expanded his playmaking to not necessarily where it's reflected drastically in the numbers, but more so in when you watch him, just the different kinds of passes that Giannis has been able to develop over the years. The only reason that he's not on here for me is the defensive coverages that he struggled with and the specific types of defenses that have limited him in the playoffs, where I feel like other guys are more unstoppable when it comes to playoff time. And again, to reiterate, that ceiling versus floor raising dynamic, it also sucks. I mean, we just haven't seen Giannis super healthy over the last few playoff runs where he's been able to prove it, right? He's been healthy for like one series over the last 3 years where maybe we would have been able to see them not necessarily go on a run, but at least see him on the court and able to prove his value in the playoffs. And so Giannis was one of the first 5 guys off for me, and he was a really close cut. I mean, one of the greatest rim pressures truly in NBA history.
Yeah, when you're talking about just the value of a non-big man, if we can call Giannis that, he's 6'11" and an absolute tank, but somebody who initiates from the perimeter, he is the greatest rim pressure, rim finisher that we've ever seen, especially when you account for what he's doing in transition, right? In the half court, he wouldn't be number 1 for me, but he is one of the absolute greatest transition players ever. So there's just an ability in terms of 2-point scoring that is so absurd that makes him such an efficient volume scorer. I do have some knocks on Giannis that make him a little bit lower for me offensively than he was for you, but he absolutely belongs at least in the conversation as an honorable mention. If you look at these years in terms of the impact stuff, plus 7.5 offensive on off, leading to a plus 5 relative offensive rating when he's on the court. Very good, not quite at the levels of offensive impact of the players on my list. And then there are some issues when it comes to the free throw shootings at times being a problem. As you mentioned, teams that really, really pack the paint. Giannis has had some issues in the postseason maintaining his scoring efficiency and volume. I do think even the intermediate shot making we saw last year has really totally regressed this year, where he's back down at 25% from the mid-range. So I am skeptical of that ever having any utility for him, like in a playoff setting. And we just haven't seen that up to this point. And then he is very ball dominant and unfortunately has never really achieved the value in terms of off-ball play finishing that maybe you would have hoped for with Giannis. That being said, I mean, he is such a walking, living, breathing mismatch, an absolute punishing force at the rim, and he is a really good passer, and he is an all-time free throw generator. So for all these reasons, Giannis is a great, great offensive player, just not quite up to the caliber of my list. I had, as another modern power forward who's a really tough cut, Dirk Nowitzki, I just left off. And what's really tough about Dirk is I think he often gets underrated because you look at the scoring numbers and the volume isn't like insane jump off the page. He was never a 30-point per game scorer. And then you look at the playmaking and you're like, all right, well, his assist numbers are consistently low. Like, he wasn't a very good passer, but I do think there is a totality of scoring value with him that ultimately makes him an extremely impactful offensive engine because he was such a ridiculously effective self-creator. I would say the best post-up scorer and isolationist of this era, massive volume and elite efficiency. And he was also this great play finisher, especially because of his elite jump shooting value, what he could do off the catch, what he could do off movement. And so Dirk, I went with 2009 to 2011. This playoff run we talked about in our top 10 scorers, it's one of the greatest we've ever seen. He's one of only 3 guys to reach 27 league adjusted points per 75 on at least plus 8% relative true shooting. So he's in Kevin Durant company there. It's absolutely ridiculous. Kevin Durant 2017 to 2019 with the Warriors. And the impact year over year with Dirk, if you look all the way from 2005 to 2011, so that's after Steve Nash leaves, those remaining peak Dirk Dallas years, he is leading a plus 10.6 offensive on-off swing, and the Mavs have a plus 6 on-court relative offensive rating with Dirk on the floor. And if you look at the years before that when he was with Nash, 02 to 04, the Mavs were better than a plus 10 relative offense with him on the court with almost a plus 11 offensive on-off swing. And it's easy to give credit to the two of them in tandem or even make it a Nash thing because of what Nash went on to do in Phoenix. But if you look at these years, like When Dirk was on the floor without Nash, they were still an elite offense, and the same is not true in the inverse. Dirk's scoring value was really the driving force of the elite Mavs offenses at that time, the all-time great Mavs offenses. 04, they had the highest relative offense ever, and then for more than a decade, just elite offenses year after year. I do think because he is such an insanely versatile and efficient scorer, his offensive game is so lean, there's so much off-ball value, he's very easy to build an elite offense around. Ultimately, the lack of passing value does just keep him off my list, though. And what's tricky with Dirk is his regular season and playoff peaks don't coincide. So if I was getting 2005 to 2007 Dirk regular season value with 2009 to 2011 playoff value, that guy very well may be on this list. But by this point, he was no longer as insane a regular season offensive engine, but his game held up better than ever before in the playoffs. I do think he was more equipped for that physicality at this point. So just shout out to Dirk because the offensive impact is so unique. I think it can get underappreciated, but when you look at what he was doing in terms of fueling elite team offense, he's got one of the best resumes ever.
Well said. I completely agree with basically everything you said. Dirk is on my honorable mentions in that exact same stretch as well. I've only got a few other names. These two guys, not to dig on them, but they weren't as tough cuts as the rest of the guys that we've already brought up. The next guy for me is 2021 to 2024, Luka Doncic. And some people may ask, why aren't you including 2026? I legitimately think Luka has gotten slightly worse since then, and I really hope this is a trend that doesn't continue with Luka. But it's like we're doing the same song and dance every single offseason. Oh, man, Luka's getting in shape. Let's put him on the magazine lifting weights, baby. Oh, yeah, this is the year where Luka gets his explosiveness, his strength. It's all going to come together. He's going to start getting downhill more. Okay, I'm waiting to see it. I just think that, one, I think we can look back and, say that he has regressed a little bit, that he has lost some of these things that where he was at an apex level back then. If Luka finds it again, then maybe we can revisit and his peak will be different. And I really hope that that's the case. He is so talented, but these are things that I can't ignore. So I think this is his peak. And unfortunately, Luka did get a little bit worse in the playoffs. It's not a drastic drop-off, but I think he was slightly worse there. And we just never seen it come together fully with his style of play to where he's undeniably on this list. A guy that we mentioned earlier, SGA, I think we've just seen it translate better, even more so than Luka in the playoffs. Even though, SGA I think has gotten a little bit worse in the playoffs, I think it has translated a little bit better. And I just trust him to lead out better offensive results with the ball in his hands than Luka. And I know that may sound counterintuitive because people will go, well, Luka can beat him in raw scoring and Luka can beat him in raw playmaking. I think SGA is way better at protecting the basketball. I think he's way better at getting downhill and getting to his shots. I think he's just a better scorer. And I would argue that, again, like you mentioned earlier with him in your honorable mentions, and I'll talk about this later when I get to him on my list, but I don't think you can fully encompass SGA's playmaking value in the box score because it's just not going to fully reflect what the gravity and what he's able to do in the stat sheet. So Luka, outside of the top 5 of my toughest cuts, but I do think he still deserves an honorable mention.
Yeah, the Luka versus SGA thing specifically, I've been pretty consistent on where there's just such a massive difference in efficiency. You can look at Luka and say, oh, the scoring volume is basically the same and the passing volume is greater. But if you just look at all the possessions these guys are responsible for ending, the possessions that they are dictating, and if you look at the points they are generating on average across all those possessions, Shai leads to substantially more efficient offense because there is so much less waste in his game. Luka creates, I think, about 4 more points per game of total offense this season when you look at scoring and assist points created, but he does so while wasting 6 more possessions per game in terms of missed shots plus turnovers. That's where Shai's ability to just carve his way to a high efficiency shot, no matter what, from anywhere on the floor, never turn the ball over. There's no waste there. And so that is absolutely kind of the epitome of what I'm talking about when people look at scoring plus passing. Oh, that's how good an offensive player you are. There are a lot of nuanced things here on the margins that do matter that can get missed. And ultimately, with Luka, even though the counting stats are great, there's just enough flaws to his offensive game. And I also just went with 22 to 24 as his peak years. I don't think 25 and 26 are in there. He's definitely having a better season this year than last year. But the numbers really aren't even there. I mean, super high turnover numbers, over 4 turnovers per 75 possessions. In terms of the scoring, the efficiency really doesn't stack up. And there's this perception of Luka as being such a great playoff performer because 2020 and 2021, he had those epic first-round series against the Clippers. But if you look at these peak years in the playoffs, 27.9 league-adjusted points per 75 on negative 1% relative true shooting. Some efficiency issues because of the reliance on the step-back three, which left him at times, especially in that 2024 run. The playmaking value also diminishes a bit, 7.3 assists per 75. I think we've seen this more so in the last postseason, but we also saw it in 2024 in the finals against the Celtics in a big way, where teams that are able to switch everything and make Luka try to beat them on an island as a scorer, they can diminish his passing value when you take him out of his comfort zone in the pick and roll. So that's another little knock on him. And then just overall, the extreme ball dominance is not something that I like. I think there's a rigidity there that doesn't scale as well to the highest levels of team offense. And if you look at the impact, Luka's got a +4 offensive on-off, and he's leading his team to a +4 relative offensive rating when he's on the court. Like, it's good offensive results. It's just not at the level of the top 10 on my list. I have a feeling that the guy who you're going to mention in tandem with Luka is James Harden. Am I right about that, Logan?
Yep, he's the next guy for me.
Yeah, Harden is interesting because there was a time when I was definitely a little bit higher on Luka's offense than Harden's because I thought he had such variety as a shot maker when it comes to the mid-range and the short-range touch shots, where he's so effective in the ability to attack you out of the post and being a little bit better as a passer, I would say. And I think that probably still holds up when you're talking about Luka at his best. Like, I think 2022 and 2023, Luka was probably even better than he was in 2024. That just so happened to be the year that his team made the finals. 2023, I think, was the best he was overall. But then you look at Harden, and it's like there really are a lot of similarities, obviously. Now, there's also differences for sure, but just in terms of extreme ball dominance, high turnover numbers. I mean, Harden is at almost 5 turnovers per 75 in the regular season in his peak years. That's 2017 to 2020. 4.5 turnovers per 75 in the playoffs. Similarly, his playmaking value diminishes a bit in the postseason. He's down to 7.3 assists per 75. And in the playoffs, his scoring efficiency and volume production, as we know, takes a significant hit where he's down to 28.8 league-adjusted points per 75, plus 2% relative true shooting. We just saw it a few too many times when it comes to him having this regular season formula that felt unsolvable, but when you get to the more physical playoffs and teams are seeing you over and over again over the course of a 7-game series, physicality ramps up, they become keyed into your tendencies, and you are super reliant on this shot, specifically the step back three that just did not translate for him, where he shot 32% from 3 in the playoffs across his Houston years. The value there did diminish, and then you do have, again, the extreme ball dominance and rigidity and just ultimately lack of variety as an offensive player that I do think hurt Harden, and that ultimately does still make me marginally higher on Luka at his best because there were just more things that he could get to in terms of that variety as a shot maker. Regular season James Harden, though, I mean, the heights that he led to, the volume, the efficiency, the scoring, playmaking combo, like, would be on my list. If we were talking about top 10 regular season offensive peaks. In the playoffs, though, he just drops off significantly enough to keep him off my list.
Yeah, that's a totality of guys that I really considered for this list.
Okay, well, as always, Logan, I've got a few more honorable mentions who need to be shouted out. This one, I don't know. I think clearly you're going to have both these guys on your list. You have to. So maybe I won't do my spiel. Maybe I'll just save it for once we get into your top 10. Kevin Durant and Kobe Bryant, 2 of my toughest cuts. Are they on your list?
They are not.
Whoa! And they weren't even among your toughest cuts.
I mean, they'd be like back top 10, but like when we get there, it's like, I don't know, if you're like 8 or 9 off my list, you weren't an honorable mention. Like, shout out KD and Kobe. I think that KD's one of the greatest jump shooters all time, like we discussed. I think Kobe is one of the game's most difficult shot makers and scorers, but I think with Kobe, you do have a little bit more of that limited playmaking value. I don't blame him. Again, like, the apex Kobe years, I wouldn't pass the ball to Smush Parker either if I was Kobe. Like, I get that. And then with KD, Kind of similar things. I think it's just like limited playmaking value and I would say overall gravity compared to other guys on my list.
Yeah, I agree with the point on KD there. I just think even though I had him as a top 2 scoring peak in the history of this game, I mean, especially in the playoffs, the volume, the efficiency, plus 9% relative true shooting while he's giving you 29 league-adjusted points per 75 from the 2017 to 2019 playoffs. Ridiculous. I advocated hard for this guy as a top 2 scoring peak, as a top 2 jump shooting peak, because I think his ability, especially from the mid-range, to get you a 50+% shot consistently, it's just so translatable. And then he's also about a 40% three-point shooter in his career, not at crazy volume, but the scoring value is absurd. However, when it comes to the ability to carry an offense, I just don't think the playmaking value is there. And I do think there's an aspect of imposition when it comes to drawing that extra defensive attention to create opportunities for teammates that KD does lack compared to some of the great perimeter players, big wings and whatnot. Like, he could live on an island and get himself an efficient jump shot over and over again, but he ultimately wasn't going to collapse the defense and create opportunities for others at the level that he would need to be on my list. And that's why he wasn't carrying the offense in these years to really high heights when he was on the floor without Steph Curry. When he was on the floor without Steph, the Warriors were like a +2 relative offense in these years with KD, which I do consider his offensive peak, although I would also hear a case for the 12 to 14 seasons. Like, I just don't think he could carry an offense quite like the top 10 guys, so that's why I do just leave him off. Kobe absolutely could carry an offense, but then I think what KD has in terms of the elite portability, the hyper efficiency, the ability to slot in alongside other elite offensive players, Kobe obviously is going to have some efficiency issues when we're talking about the high heights of all-time offensive players. There is a lack of elite playmaking with him, but the scoring value, the volume, the versatility, doing it off ball, dominating from the middle of the floor, like, he did draw overwhelming amounts of defensive attention, and he could still deliver you 29 league-adjusted points per 75 on like +3% relative true shooting, better efficiency than he sometimes gets credit for, that held up really, really well in the playoffs. And I also think his playmaking can be somewhat underrated because, again, the defense was just so keyed in on him at all times. He really did elevate his team offense over these years, 2006 to 2010, +11 offensive on off. That's elite offensive impact. There's just no two ways about it. +5.4 on-court relative offensive rating. Didn't reach the top heights of elite all-time offense, and I do think there is some ceiling there just because, again, Kobe didn't really self-create, didn't really get to the most efficient offense, but there is, with him, just an aspect of volume bending a defense that is really rare historically. I've got a couple more modern guys, Logan, who I just want to shout out real quick. Chris Paul from 2013 to 2015. I am so high on CP3. I think he is the second greatest pick and roll player ever in terms of at least the pure decision-making, processing, the passing ability, the lethal mid-range scoring. I think he's somebody who got slightly better in the playoffs, could ramp up his scoring volume and maintain his efficiency, and is an elite passer. He led back-to-back number one offenses in 2014 and 2015, led the Clippers to a +9.5 relative offense when he was on the court, had a +10 offensive on-off. Like, all these elite offensive metrics, so impactful in the possession game because he never turned the ball over. Ultimately, there are just guys who could reach really higher heights of offensive creation. CP3 was a very efficient scorer at good volume, but couldn't crank the volume all the way up. And then his passing, very valuable, but because he wasn't the most aggressive, because he didn't have the most angles available to him given his smaller size, didn't deliver like that elite all-time great passing impact. Obviously, I think he's one of the best passers ever, but I'm talking about when you hold him up against a Nash or what have you, there is absolutely a gap there. And then he is also very ball dominant, which there's a little bit of rigidity there. But also, we saw him work incredibly well alongside James Harden. So I'm really high on CP3, just doesn't quite have the peak of my top 10. Dwayne Wade, another guy, 2009 to 2011, just ridiculous scoring peak, underrated playmaking, one of the all-time great slashers, really good off-ball scorer, and just like insane carry jobs. I mean, 2009 is one of the greatest carry jobs ever, and over these years, he got a +11.4 offensive on-off differential, massive, +3.7 relative offense when he's on the court, which is good, not great, but I think you have to contextualize. 2009, he was carrying bums on that team. Like, there was a total lack of talent alongside him. It just comes down to not elite playmaking, not reaching the most elite heights of scoring efficiency, having a good, not great over-the-top shot-making game, but I'm super high on D-Wade. I think he deserves a mention here, at least. It's just a really high bar. And then Charles Barkley is the last guy who I really considered. The scoring efficiency is so absurd. I mean, from 88 to 91, his peak years in Philly that I went with, over 25 league-adjusted points per 75 on plus 12.3% relative true shooting. Led the league in true shooting 4 straight years. And super impactful offensive engine. Led a couple top 3 offenses. In the games that he didn't play over this stretch, their offensive rating dropped off by 5 points. So significant difference there. My knocks on Chuck, some scoring blindness. He was a good passer, but he also missed opportunities there and could be a little bit of a black hole at times. Couldn't dial the scoring volume all the way up, but really imposing physical force, versatile scorer. Questionable shot selection at times, but didn't keep him from being one of the most efficient scorers ever. Some turnover issues, although he did cut those down at this point. That was more of a problem earlier in his career. I'm really high on Chuck's offense. Once again, it's just the bar is super, super high, and there are guys who I just think ultimately lead to the highest levels of offense a bit more so than Chuck. Giannis I had down as an honorable mention. Shout out to George Gervin, just one of the all-time great scorers who led to, I think, 5 straight top 4 offenses in San Antonio with great scoring volume and great efficiency. And then I did have one dishonorable mention, and that was Karl Malone. So I am very interested to see, Logan, where your list is going to go. You always keep me on my toes. I know it's not going to be Larry Bird at number 10 this time, but who is in your 10 spot?
I do have another Caucasian. I know you're a fan of this fella. I have Jerry West here in my 10 spot. And after our scorers episode, I don't know, man, I just couldn't leave the guy off. The fact that he could maintain his efficiency in the playoffs while upping his scoring is so unbelievable to me. It's really unique the way him and the Lakers offense scaled to the playoffs in comparison to like some of the other guys I mentioned, like compared to a Big O. And the thing that I struggled with is like clearly West has a better co-star in a guy like Elgin Baylor in a way that like Oscar Robertson just doesn't have during his peak years with Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. And that was the real dynamic that I was agonizing over when going, do I go with Jerry or do I go with Oscar? Because I think Jerry's got a better supporting cast offensively, and Oscar is dragging bums to being the best regular season offense in basketball. But I did want to reward Jerry for the Lakers being carrying that elite offense in the regular season over the playoffs, and Jerry just being an absolute freak. In the regular season, he's giving you 30 points and 6 assists on 56.9% true shooting with 11 free throw attempts per game. In the playoffs, he ups his scoring to 36 points per game with 5 assists per game on just 1% lower than his regular season true shooting while maintaining 11 free throw attempts per game. And outside of the 1 year in 64 where they get bounced in the first round by the Hawks, 65 and 66, they maintain their offense in the playoffs. Like when I'm looking back at the 60s, and I didn't look at it arbitrarily where I was like, oh, I got to have X number of guys from this era or X number of guys from this era. I just did look at it where Jerry is a guy that in the 60s you can just put the ball in his hands every single possession, and I know what I'm getting. He's going to lead 2 elite offensive results where 64, they're the number 2 offense, 65, they're the number 2 offense, 66, they're the number 1 offense in basketball. And he does have Elgin, but outside of that, I don't think he's got like overwhelming offensive help like in the wings. It really is Jerry handling business, man. Also, what's ridiculous to me, this has nothing really to do with Jerry West. Holy shit, man. They had no rebounders on any of these rosters, Carson. I kind of can't believe it, man. They are getting housed in the rebounding category year over year.
Disrespecting Rudy LaRusso. I just won't stand for it, Logan. I just won't stand for it.
It's astonishing to me, man. I just wonder how much better these teams could have been. They're bottom 3.
That's why they had to get Happy Hairston in there, baby. That's a championship player.
Dude, they're bottom 3 in rebounding every single season over this peak from Jerry, man. It's baffling. But I know you have you are one of Jerry's staunchest supporters year in, year out, episode in, episode out.
Yeah.
I had to have him on this list, man, with how his game translated to the playoffs and how the Lakers offense translated to the playoffs. Do you have him on your list, or did you omit Jerry?
I do not have Jerry. I saved him because I was pretty confident once we narrowed down the names that were not on your list that Jerry had to be on here. The scoring value Absolutely. I had him as my number 4 scoring peak in NBA history. I think he is arguably a top 2 playoff scorer that the league has ever seen, only to Michael Jordan. And honestly, I would say, yeah, he is that second guy. Like, just so ridiculous. In these years, 64 to 66, the playoffs, 30.4 league adjusted points per 75. The only player with a higher number than that is Michael Jordan, on plus 7.5% relative true shooting. And like you said, led 3 straight number 2 offenses at this time. Of course, that's out of like 9 teams, but nevertheless, leading to elite team offense. And the playoff offenses were really, really good. They consistently did translate at a high level. I think the Lakers had 2 number 1 playoff offenses in this stretch too. Ultimately, my knock on Jerry, and the reason that I prefer Oscar as an offensive player, is when Jerry peaked as a scorer, the playmaking value was just not quite there. I mean, over these years, the scoring is phenomenal, right? But in the regular season, 4.7 adjusted assists per 75, and the adjustment there is I do give the 60s guys a boost to account for the difference in league efficiency at that time compared to the league average, basically post-merger. And then in the playoffs, 4.4 adjusted assists per 75. So yes, the scoring value was so immense that he led to elite team offense, but at the end of the day, Oscar led to more elite team offense. Like, that is the reality, because I do think he was lapping Jerry as a playmaker at this point. And then you get to a point with Jerry where his playmaking peaks, right? Late 60s, early 70s, that 69 to 72 range. But at that point, his scoring value has really dropped off in terms of both volume and efficiency. And ironically, the 72 playoff run is far and away the worst of Jerry's career, even though that's when his team finally wins the title. The guy's got a million playoff masterclasses and his team wins it all when he shoots like 39% from the field. But I just didn't feel those 2 peaks came close enough to coinciding to get Jerry on my list. That being said, I do still think there's an argument for him being here. Oscar is my one guy for the 60s, though. And by the way, the same knock that I mentioned against Oscar is what I would hold against Jerry here, where he's leading to top 2 offenses, but they aren't separating from the pack by a crazy amount. They're like +3 kind of relative offenses compared to a lot of these guys who we're going to look at. They were leading to +8, like ridiculous heights of team offense. So that is just partly a product of era, and the 60s being a defensive era. I have another Lakers legend in my 10 spot, Logan. I have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar from 1974 to 1977. So that Bucks-Lakers transitional period is what I went with, as we discussed in the top 10 scorers episode. There's an argument for the 77 to 80 stretch because his playoff scoring is so absurd, but I think you get a better combination of regular season and playoff scoring here. And just overall elite offensive value. In the regular season, 25.1 league-adjusted points per 75 on +7% relative true shooting. And what I think is underrated with Kareem is we obviously think of scoring first, and he's one of the all-time greats there, but underrated passer. And the value that I think we need to appreciate with any big men that we talk about on this list is the offensive rebounding value, where Kareem wasn't like an insane monster. He wasn't Shaq level in that category, but 2.8 offensive rebounds per 75 in the regular season. We don't have turnover data, but I would estimate about 3 turnovers per 75 possessions based on what he did in the following years. In the playoffs is really where he goes a level up, though. The scoring volume goes up to 28.5 league-adjusted points per 75. The efficiency is absurd, plus 10% relative true shooting, 3.6 assists, 3.5 offensive rebounds, and his impact on team offense was absolutely massive. Like 1974, he led Milwaukee to be a number 1 offense without a lot of offensive help, with a pretty significantly diminished version of Oscar Robertson. And by the way, before this peak that we're looking at, 71, the Bucks were one of the greatest relative offenses in NBA history. So Kareem did that as well in this decade. And then the 75 season is really interesting because that's the year the Bucks missed the playoffs, and that sometimes is used against Kareem. Like, people say, oh, at his peak, his team missed the playoffs twice, because they also missed it in 76 with the Lakers. But the context I think is always necessary there is when Kareem was on the floor, the Bucks were 35-30. They were an elite offense. It's when he was off the court that they went 3-14, and they scored more than 10 points per game fewer than they did with him in the lineup. So you're talking about probably like a 9-10 point swing in offensive rating that they suffered in games that Kareem didn't play. The skill set, he's the greatest post scorer ever, in my opinion. He has the most unstoppable scoring move in NBA history with the skyhook, which he had really refined at this point, and he was better equipped to deal with elite physicality and size and length than he was in the earlier 70s. And so he just had a move that he could get to with such efficiency that nobody could take away. He could get to it at real volume. Strong play finisher, too, if you look at cutting and offensive rebounding value and a little bit of the pick and roll finishing. I do think an underrated passer when it comes to drawing overwhelming amounts of defensive attention, right? So many double teams and being able to create quality shots for his teammates at a pretty good level. And so I compared him to a couple of the other guys who I was like all-time great scorers, not great playmakers. I think versus a Kevin Durant, for example, Kareem's playmaking value is greater because I do think he's a bit more of a natural passer, but also because of all the attention he demanded from the post and the opportunities that creates for teammates compared to a KD who was more so isolating from the perimeter and could get himself a bucket one-on-one, but again, not as impactful in terms of drawing the defense to him. And then I do think the value on the margins is another separator there. The play finishing, the offensive rebounding. Ultimately, I think Kareem slightly better built to carry an offense than a guy like Kevin Durant. I considered Shai for this spot. Again, another great scorer. I do feel that the playoff translatability is commendable with Kareem. And once again, just some of the ways he impacted offense in a team context that can get a bit underappreciated.
What year specifically did you go with for Kareem?
74 to 77.
74 to 77. I did go with 77 to 80 for Kareem, and I have Kareem up in my number 7 spot. And I kind of ironically feel like, and maybe this just naturally happens as time passes, I kind of feel like Kareem is slowly becoming underrated. And I just don't know if that's naturally because of how we're getting removed from his peak, and that just naturally happens over time. I agree with so much of what you said, and I think the thing that gets overlooked the most with Kareem is his gravity and his playmaking. If you go back and watch any games from this era, Kareem is routinely drawing 3 or 4 guys on the block or on the elbow. And the thing that's most astounding about it is how impervious he is to this defensive attention. If it is him just rising up and firing and knocking down a sky hook, which is utterly unstoppable, unblockable, you can't touch that shot, or if it's him hitting a guy who's cutting or kicking out to a guy on the perimeter. So much of when we talk about gravity, we think about Steph Curry and all the defensive attention he gets, or we think about a Shaquille O'Neal and all the paint attention he gets, right? Or LeBron and the rim pressure. I think Kareem's lack of flash and athleticism at this point of his career, you can kind of just overlook it, right? Because all of those guys have this shock and awe element to their game, with Giannis and Shaq yamming on people, LeBron too, with Steph, and just what a wonder and a marvel the three-point shot is. And I think you can kind of take Kareem's gravity and playmaking value for granted. And so while that's a big component of it, the biggest component is just the scoring value. From 77 to 80, he's 25 points per game in the regular season. He's 32 points per game in the playoffs. In the regular season, he's 61.3% true shooting. He's 62% true shooting in the playoffs. He ups his scoring and he ups his efficiency. I also, he's getting to the line more. 6 free throw attempts per game in the regular season to 8 in the playoffs. He just scaled better and got better in the playoffs. And again, kind of like you mentioned, I kind of think you can take it for granted too, because it doesn't coincide with his peak athleticism when he's with Milwaukee. It also doesn't coincide with his the apex of his team success when Magic Johnson comes along. So I kind of think that this peak version of offensive Kareem can kind of get overlooked. Again, you can look at other versions of Kareem in totality, and I would hear arguments for that version maybe being better when he has his peak defensive value, when he's coming into the league, when he's an elite athlete, right? I think this is the best offensive version of Kareem because there's just nothing you can do with the guy. He is effectively unstoppable. There is nothing you can do with him. All the defensive attention, he can make his way out of it. He can just shoot over the top of these defenses. Now, when we do look at compared to other guys, I think there are guys that balance that scoring and playmaking load a little bit more to either who enhance their teammates more. And that's why Kareem isn't higher on my list. But, I mean, there's just nothing you can do with the guy. And so I had to have Kareem here. I think 77 to 80 is his offensive peak. And, I've got him at my 7 spot.
Yeah, there isn't a wow factor with him, but I think that undersells what a freak he was. The fact that he was 7'2" and so nimble and agile, and the footwork was so good, and he had such elite touch that he could get to this shot that was almost 60%, I would estimate, whenever he wanted in the skyhook, and he could do it over either shoulder. Like, there's such value there, and I do think there was a willingness with him to play within a team context, to move without the basketball, that I would say puts him above a Nakeem or a Wilt, guys who were more rigid post players who didn't have that same play finishing off-ball value. That's something that sets apart all the bigs who are on my list, honestly, that real high-end off-ball value. But I do think the passing value was there. I think that he found cutters. I think he was a good outlet passer. And so there's a lot to really like about Kareem. Ultimately, the reason I don't have him higher is I do think it's generally easier for perimeter players to dictate more offense. I think that they can reach higher heights of playmaking value, and in some cases, higher heights of scoring volume than a Kareem did as well. Like, yes, he led number one offenses. He wasn't somebody who was going to do that every year like some of the guys higher up on this list. Like, there's a year in here, 1976, where he does play the entire season, and the Lakers were just like 8th in offensive rating, I think, in a smaller league. And then they were the number 5 offense in 1977. So he was a great offensive engine. Was he going to as inevitably like just impose himself to the level where you were going to be a top tier offense every year like the guys I have higher up? No, and that would be my knock on Kareem. But it's a pretty subtle one, and in terms of what a big man could do at that time, he's really about as good as you could possibly be. Who is in your 9 spot, Logan?
I have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander here in my 9 spot. I went with 2023 to 2026, and I agree a lot with what you mentioned earlier. I considered SGA all the way up to number 5, and the only knock that I would have on SGA is that we just haven't seen the peak laid out in totality the way we have with other guys. You just haven't seen his career played out, pretty simply. Like, I thought about him skill set wise all the way up to number 5 because I think SGA he's unbelievable. And that's why I will never listen to anybody that shits or dumps on SGA. He is awesome. He is impeccable. The mid-range scoring is art. It is beautiful to watch game in, game out, and it is utterly unstoppable. I think if you were making a modern guard in a lab today, it would be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Like, he is so utterly unstoppable at getting to his spots, at rising and firing. He is just something so special to watch. And some of the things that you talked about earlier that I just don't think get really praised as much as they should or won't show up in the box score as much, the ability to limit turnovers in a way that some of these other guys struggled with is so immaculate. The playmaking value isn't fully appreciated in the box score due to a couple of reasons. One, hockey assists, but two, sometimes his teammates' inability to capitalize on the advantages that he does create, where I think that Shai does have a lack of an elite offensive supporting cast that could maximize him more if those guys were better offensive players. And a little bit, the only other knock that I would have on Shai not being higher on my list, one, we haven't seen his peak play out in the playoffs as much. The playoff runs that we have seen, his efficiency has taken a slight ding where other guys just did translate better. But again, I don't think I can, eliminate him from my list because I think that Shai just hasn't had as many runs. So we're going to see Shai in the playoffs, and he is going to be able to prove to us, does he belong on this list in the 9 spot? Should he be omitted from the list? Or should he be all the way at number 5? In some of these elite offensive player conversations, we're just going to see that play out naturally over the next 1 to 3 seasons by him being in the playoffs. So a lot of this is just Shai being youthful and, him not being deeper and deeper into his career, where I think Shai could climb very, very high on this list if we see his 3-ball translate in a big way. If we see his playmaking value delivered in the playoffs on a bigger stage. So a lot of this does just have to do with the fact that we haven't seen it enough. But Shai is the perfect modern guard to me. 32, 5, and 6 on 63.9% true shooting in the playoffs. 30 points per game, 7 assists a night, 57.6% true shooting. Some of this I do think is some shortcomings of SGA's game, really just the three ball. But when you watch these series, like the Dallas series, where the defense completely slants towards him, I think Shai got an unnecessary amount of hate from that series where
100%.
his teammates just couldn't capitalize on the right decisions that
He was the best
made.
player in that series. Said it then, like it remains true.
Is that his fault that his teammates couldn't make open shots? No, but not at all. Like the Mavericks just employed the exact right defensive strategy to minimize him. That's not through any fault of his own. He was still an immaculate shot maker in that series. So I had to put SGA on this list. He has let out a 121.9 offensive rating with him on the floor, 8.5 points better than without him over this stretch. And I only think he can climb higher on this list. I understand why he's not here for you. We just haven't seen it enough, but there's no doubt in my mind that I think Shai has the capabilities and will likely climb higher on this list. Like I said, I mean, I considered him all the way up to number 5. I just have to see it a little bit more, where the other guys have finished their careers. We have seen it over multiple seasons, but there's no doubt in my mind that I think when all is said and done, SGA will be higher on this list for me.
I can't tell you how badly I wanted him on this list. I think everybody can probably imagine it, but I just want to stamp my foot in the ground as deeply as I possibly can when it comes to having all the territory on Shai Island that there is. The guy is so unbelievable, and I fully do believe his efficiency is going to translate more so to the playoffs. I think in a lot of ways he's perfectly built to be an elite playoff scorer because he is so elite as an intermediate scorer where teams do load up and he can still get to his bread and butter offense in a way that nobody else can, combined with his totally unique driving ability, the insane ball handling, the masterful footwork and body control and balance and flexibility and all these things that allow him to get to the rim, even against packed paints in a way that nobody else can. I talk about this a fair bit with Shai, but if you just break it down level by level, the fact that he can get to a 70+% shot at the rim 5+ times a game as an all-time great driver and rim finisher, the fact that he can get to a 55% shot in the paint outside the restricted area 5 times a game, and then from the mid-range he's been over 50%, gets there 5 times a game, and then from the three-point line he's 39%, gets there 5 times a game, all the while he gets to the free throw line 10 times a game, and that's a 90% shot. It's just absolutely absurd the efficiency that he can generate with the ball in his hands, all the different spots he can get to from where he is elite, and how impossible it is to keep him from getting to those spots because of all the combinations of elite traits that he has, the ball handling, the footwork, the flexibility, the ability to spring back, and all the different counters he has, and then just the ridiculous shot making at his size.
I know we just did our top 10 scorers episode, so this might be a redundant question, but I mean, I think Shai is probably going to end up, I think it's more than likely that he's a top 3 scoring guard in NBA history, right? I mean, could be number 2 just behind MJ.
I already had him number 3 behind just MJ and Jerry West. And the advantage that West has over him, obviously, is a significant difference in playoff performance. But in terms of regular season scoring value, I think what he is doing in 2026 is very, very Jordan-esque and at a level that really only those two have ever had. 2016 Steph has this ridiculous efficiency and great volume, but even his volume wasn't quite Jordan Shai level this year. It's absolutely ridiculous. I couldn't really be higher on him in that way. My criticism of Shai would be it hasn't translated in the same way yet in the playoffs, even though I think his playoff performance can be underrated because what we talk about, what's so special with Shai is he allows you to build this all-time great defense by just saying you can put all these great defenders but one-dimensional offensive players who don't really handle very well, who are inconsistent off the catch, who aren't really creators, and just put the ball in Shai's hand, and he can carry you to these very good offensive heights with his overwhelming scoring volume and protecting the basketball like he does, and all that stuff is so incredible. So I think when you consider the offensive dip in efficiency, you have to consider the offensive circumstances he's been working with are rough, especially in the playoffs when back-to-back years the Thunder's shooting has sucked around him and teams have played crazy aggressive coverages against him. My criticism would be the three-point shooting leaving him in last year's playoffs. I would like to see that hold up over a run because even though he's shooting better from deep this year, now he has again hit a little lull there, and I just don't think it's as consistent compared to the rest of his game, which is so ridiculously dependable. The three-point shot can come and go a little bit, but it's more so, honestly, the playoff decision-making not being as fine-tuned as I would have liked last year, where early in series, especially that Denver series, right? Sometimes he was just coming out and he was forcing up shots a little bit too much against coverages that were very much dictating that he should pass more. That's my knock on him at this point. I just want to see him have a more flawless decision-making postseason. I think we saw it even a little bit against the Nuggets. I mean, just when they played the other day, right? I would have liked to see him be more of a passer against those sort of coverages where that team is loading up on him so aggressively. And last year they played a lot of zone. But everybody is doing everything they possibly can to keep Shai from beating them as a scorer, which speaks to his ridiculous scoring value. And overall, I think it's justified to have him here. Again, what's tough is 2026 Shai is a different player than even 2024 Shai. I mean, the efficiency has reached different heights. I think the playmaking is even better. The three-point shooting is better. So I was trying to figure out how do I balance that over a 3-year peak, and that's where I was like, Kareem in my 10 spot, with what he did in the playoffs, I think probably deserves the nod.
Yeah, only thing I was going to say about the Nuggets series, I agree with you fundamentally, but like in a Kobe kind of way, I don't know, with how his teammates were shooting in that series, I don't really know if I can blame SGA that much for calling his own number.
Yeah, but even if you look at like the Grizzlies series, that's kind of my only criticism is sometimes, and it's really more so in the playoffs than in the regular season, we saw him get a little bit too much in that score first mindset. But I also think, I mean, he was overall quite good against Denver and like was really efficient in that series. It was honestly Indiana, again, he wasn't quite as efficient and maybe had some of those same dilemmas, but I thought he was masterful against Minnesota. And overall, I think is up there for the most consistent scorer we've seen in the history of this game. Like regular season, the guy is on pace to break the record for most consecutive 20-point games. He's going to break Wilt Chamberlain's record. He's doing stuff that Michael Jordan has never done. Again, that ability, put the ball in his hands, and he can just impose himself getting to spots from which he is so efficient at such volume. It is absolutely incredible. I think Shai has an argument to be on this list. I think Shai will be on this list. I hope Shai is on this list. Right now, again, it's just not quite enough, and that's where I do keep him just off as one of my absolute toughest cuts. In my 9 spot, Logan, I have a man who is not on your list. This is where I have Oscar Robertson, and I think I just have a tremendous appreciation for what he was doing within the context of his time and how far ahead of his peers he was as an offensive player. Again, we've already had the conversation about offensive value not being what it was in the 1960s compared to what it is in really any period since, because the game was more dictated by dominant defenses. And so Oscar is leading number 1 offense year after year, but often those are like +4 relative offenses or what have you. They're not the biggest outliers ever. That being said, I do still have him here because that offensive value was just so remarkable in the context of that time. And if you make the adjustments, the scoring volume doesn't pop off the screen as much as it does in terms of raw points per game, looking at him from 62 to 66, 22.7 league adjusted points per 75 in the regular season, just under 21 in the playoffs. But the efficiency is what's insane. Plus 8% relative true shooting. Doing that as a guard at this time is so absurd. It's what makes him and Jerry West both so remarkable. And then he's also giving you 8 adjusted assists per 75 possessions. So that playmaking value is really what was so remarkable about Oscar. The fact that there was a little pocket of time where he made an argument for being best scorer and playmaker in the league simultaneously before West hit his peak as a scorer. Like if you look at 61, especially 62. I think Oscar had a legitimate argument to hold both of those titles, and that's just a very rare thing in NBA history. He was a walking mismatch just with his size. He could shoot over top of people and was really good from the mid-range. He was such an effective driver and got to the free throw line at this astronomical rate. And then as a passer, he was brilliant. He had so many angles available to him because of his size. He was really the first great pick and roll player and could pick you apart there. Really the first great ball dominant playmaking guard overall, like sort of the father of this archetype of the point guard, quarterback, volume scorer, and playmaker. Put the ball in my hands. I'm going to make us an elite offense. Oscar was the first guy ever to do that. And the playmaking value is just so far beyond the rest of the league. I mentioned this in our top 10 passers episode, but throughout the 60s, he's averaging 10.5 assists per game. And there are 3 other dudes who are even at 6 assists per game. What he did in transition, which was so important at this time, being able to be a dominant force in the full court with his size and his athleticism and his passing, the vision, the anticipation. Like, he just created so much offense for his teammates, and especially considering the spacing of this time, the offensive surroundings at this time, it's so damn impressive. Also, if you look at the offensive impact, obviously we don't have on-off data with Oscar Robertson from the 60s, but he joined a team that was a shitty offense, and he immediately made them a number one offense, and he improved their offensive rating by 4.5 points. So I think even though offense was at a low point in the 60s, Oscar stands out above the rest by a large enough margin for me to have him on this list, because in terms of just churning out number one offenses, the only other two players to ever do that for their team at this level or higher are Steve Nash and Magic. And those guys, it's different with both of them because, I mean, their offenses are surpassing the league by more. But again, that's pretty insane company to be in as an offensive engine regardless.
Yeah, I completely understand Oscar being here, and he was one of my toughest cuts. What it came down for me was really just the fact that he slightly got a little bit worse in the playoffs. And like I mentioned earlier, the thing that made that so hard to balance was, again, the supporting cast, where, I mean, again, Oscar is dragging these guys to being the number one offense year in, year out. And I don't know how much to hold that against him. But Wes scoring, and I get it because I think Oscar is lapping him as a playmaker. I just think Wes scoring was so reliable and so efficient and translated so well to the playoffs that I just marginally preferred how elite his scoring translated into the playoffs versus Oscar in totality. But I understand the argument. I think Oscar's an all-time great, and I have no issue really with him being on this list whatsoever.
Yeah, I think the most interesting point, you're right. I mean, he wasn't quite as effective in the playoffs, but he was still very effective, and the Royals' playoff offenses were still really, really good. It's just so interesting that you can have this team that is number one in offense every year, and they're ultimately like a mediocre basketball team for the most part, right? They win a couple playoff series, and that's it. And most years, they're hovering like a few games above 500, and part of that is their defenses were really bad, but part of that is, again, just defense was disproportionately valuable to offense at this time. But I still give Oscar a lot of credit for what he was able to do in this era that was so much geared towards the defenses. And look, I don't want to make it sound like he was playing with straight bums offensively, okay? He had Jack Twyman in the early years. He had Jerry Lucas. He had Wayne Embry. Like, he had some good offensive players around him, but he carried a massive, massive load. They were a bad offense without him. And where the supporting cast really lacked is defensively. That's where these Royals teams failed, and they failed Oscar. And Oscar wasn't a good defender in his own right, but if he had had good team defenses, these sort of offenses could have been winning titles. They could have been making finals appearances, especially if he was in the Western Conference, right? Then maybe it's Oscar Robertson and the Royals who have, 4 or 5 finals appearances because the conference was just so much weaker at that time and you didn't have to go through the best defense ever until the finals. So I think Oscar can get underrated in a number of ways. I don't think it's egregious to have him off the list, though. So who is in your 8 spot, Logan?
This is one of the toughest guys to rank, in my opinion. In my 8 spot, I have Shaquille O'Neal from 2000 to 2002, and I would wholeheartedly hear an argument for him being higher on this list. This version of Shaq is just one of the most dominant players in NBA history, point blank, bar none. Shaq, from 2000 to 02, this is the complete stretch. He's number 2 in points per game over this stretch, just behind Allen Iverson, but he's number 1 in field goal percentage. In the regular season, was giving you 29 points per game with 4 assists per game on 58% true shooting. In the playoffs, is giving you 30 points per game with 3 assists per game on 56.2% true shooting. And one of these little things on the margins that you mentioned earlier, he's also giving you 4 offensive rebounds per game. And when we talk about this kind of offensive gravity, I think Shaq can kind of get underappreciated as a playmaker as well, where in the finals, he's up near 4 or 5 assists per game as well. Shaq could pass the ball and had that kind of gravity where if he's drawing 2-3 guys to the paint, he would play make. And if you don't allocate that kind of attention to him on the block, he's just going to bowl a guy over and put it in the basket. My only real knocks about Shaq and why he's not higher on my list is the free throw shooting, which, as we mentioned with Wilt, he'd have higher value too if he could knock down a free throw. He'd be insanely efficient. And I would just say he doesn't have as much playmaking value as some of the other guys higher on my list. One of the craziest numbers, and shout out Data Baller for this, for expanding their years on this. Shaq was improving his offense by 11 points versus him in terms of on-off differential, which is just a ridiculous number from 2000 to 02. He's turning out a 112.3 offensive rating with him on the court. The most interesting debate to me is him versus a guy like Kareem because they're so similar. I would hear an argument for Shaq's gravity, and man, these were the two toughest guys that I had a debate between, is who's going to go higher. I went with Kareem just because I think he was just slightly more efficient when it comes to the playoffs. But damn, it's so close. It's just like the rigidity, I guess, of Shaq. But, like, I can't even really hold that against him that much because he's one of the most dominant forces in NBA history. I just think Kareem's providing slightly more playmaking value and a little bit more off-ball scoring value while bringing me similar gravity. But I would also hear someone just saying, yeah, but Shaq's gravity just trounces all of that. So these were the two toughest guys that I had to rank. I think they're so similar. I think Kareem's scoring scaled a little bit more to the playoffs where he was a little bit more efficient. But these are the two toughest guys that I had to debate. And then, but with that, I would hear someone saying Shaq's offensive rebounding value trounces Kareem's. That's very marginal too, but Shaq's beating him by 1 to 2 per year, or I would hear an argument for that. So Kareem versus Shaq was one of the most difficult debates that I had. I ultimately lean on Kareem, but that was super close to me. Ultimately, I go with 2000 to 02 Shaq here in my 8th spot.
So I have the same years. I have Shaq in my 7th spot. I do feel pretty strongly that he should be above Kareem, and it does come down to what you're mentioning, just with the gravity, the overwhelming amounts of defensive attention that he was going to draw in the paint, the fact that he is truly unparalleled as a paint scoring force. Like, that's where the impact is just so massive. And when we talk about players who are sold short by the sort of thinking that offense comes down to scoring plus passing, that's where Shaq gets so shortchanged. Because, I mean, if you look at just like pure scoring value and their level as passers, like, he and Kareem are very close in both those categories, but there is a different sort of scoring threat with Shaq and the preventative measures that had to be taken against Shaq as a scorer and what that did for his team's offense, to me, is just more impactful. Dude, shout out to Data Baller. I mean, just some phenomenal numbers. How about this? You mentioned the plus 11 offensive on-off swing in these couple years, which is insane, and a plus 8.5 on-court relative offensive rating, which is elite all-time heights. What I think is probably the coolest thing to look at is this is actually all the way from 2001 to 2004. I just expanded it to all of Shaq's LA years for which we have the data to get a larger sample size. His team, when he was on the court, shot 4.5% better from three, which I think speaks to just how much he is sucking the defense in, creating such high quality perimeter shots for his teammates, be that indirectly just through, I mean, Shaq was so often getting double teamed off ball, right? Sometimes it just leads to a wide open three for a teammate and he doesn't have to touch the ball, but he also was a good passer out of those situations, creating open threes for teammates. That is very telling. At the same time, their rim frequency and rim efficiency also both jumped by 10+% with Shaq on. So that's not surprising, but like, it just shows you he is the greatest rim force in NBA history beyond comparison. And the pressure that applies to a defense enhances his perimeter offense for his team, like just about as much as any player ever. This is where I think Shaq is such an interesting, unique offensive engine who I think I underrated previously because his impact is so unique that it's not going to be captured again by points, assists, whatever, but the scoring volume is massive. The playoff translatability, where he's a 29 league adjusted points per 75 guy on plus 6% relative true shooting in the regular season, plus 4% relative true shooting in the playoffs. And I think he really does excel in a number of ways on the margins that do matter to me. I think both he and Kareem, pretty elite off-ball scorers. I think the edge that Shaq does have there is the offensive rebounding. And even if Kareem was somebody who would fit in a little bit more, maybe into like a more fluid motion offense, like when it comes to just stationing Shaq in the post area, along the baseline. Like, again, you constantly had to keep multiple sets of eyes on him. If you deny, he can spin off, he can get to a lob, you can get an interior pass to him, and that's a dunk. If you let him get a catch, you're fucked. Like, you're just fucked. You have to double hard, triple hard. And by the way, if you double or triple, he is the best at scoring through multiple bodies like that in NBA history. It just comes down to completely unrivaled physical force when it comes to the size-strength combination with underrated agility, footwork, and touch. I always think the post hook going over either shoulder from Shaq is one of the most lethal weapons in NBA history. You think about the drop step dunks, and of course the power is absolutely absurd, but it's the combination of power, footwork, and touch that made him so damn unstoppable. And this is where I think earlier in my basketball enjoying career, like, I had a perception that Shaq was maybe more reliant on perimeter play than he actually is. And I think there's this notion of, okay, you can have a dominant interior force like Shaq, but you need a closer like Kobe, right? You need somebody who can dominate from the perimeter like Kobe to pair with that. But there's just so many years in which Shaq disproves that. 1998, 1999, before Kobe was a star, Shaq led two strong top two offenses, like two of the top 60 relative offenses that we've seen in the NBA since 1960. Going back even to Orlando, he led a number one offense and one of the all-time great offenses. Like, the impact that he had as a big man is just unique, especially pre-Jokic. And they're totally different in how they do it, but the extent to which he was an all-time great offensive engine, I do think is different from even Kareem, because again, Kareem is not somebody who every year was leading out top two offenses. Shaq was one of those guys. Shaq is totally an outlier as a center in that way. So you've got the GOAT level post scoring, you've got the elite off-ball scoring with cutting and offensive rebounding, you've got the good passing value as a center, always a very willing passer. You've got the ridiculous playoff performance. I mean, 3 of the most dominant playoff runs and 3 of the most dominant final series that we've ever seen with the greatest paint gravity and paint scoring value in NBA history. I just think all the results support having Shaq up this high, and maybe some people would argue higher. It's an interesting case. Ultimately, I do have some knocks on Shaq being the free throw shooting, the fact that he's not a top-tier playmaker in NBA history, although I do think he's a supreme advantage creator for his offense because he was a walking advantage, and that's where, again, you have the impact on his teammates' offense that is bigger than a Kareem's for me. And then you do have some of the spacing stuff where he did have to be, like, stationed in the paint at all times. Ultimately, though, we're picking nits here. That's the reason I don't have Shaq higher, but he's absolutely ridiculously dominant.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with this. I think there is one of the big reasons why I went with Kareem is that kind of rigidity that you're talking about, but it's super close between these two guys. I think Kareem and Shaq, outside of my honorable mentions, were the toughest decision I had to make on this list, but I do lean on Kareem.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at, again, these top 60 relative offenses that I've aggregated, if you look at the entirety of Shaq's prime years, he led 5 of those top 60 relative offenses. Kareem only led the one in 1971. So I do think that that consistent difference in terms of reaching elite team offensive heights is an edge for Shaq that speaks to his insane impact. In my 8th spot, I do have Larry Bird here, Logan, from 84 to 88. It's a 5-year run in which in the regular season he's giving you 25 league-adjusted points per 75 on almost plus 5% relative true shooting with 6.3 assists, 1.8 offensive rebounds, like very underrated part of his value, and just 2.8 turnovers. So kept turnovers low, positive impact in the possession game overall with the offensive rebounding. In the playoffs, the numbers do drop a bit. 22.5 league-adjusted points per 75 on plus 3.4% relative true shooting, 5.8 assists per 75, still 1.9 offensive rebounds, and the turnovers are actually even a little bit lower. I don't think the story is told by the raw numbers here with Larry Bird. I think feel was his superpower. I think offensive versatility was his superpower. As I touched on earlier, the impact supports it. Like, this guy fueled 4 straight top 3 offenses and one of the 10 greatest relative offenses we've ever seen in 1988 specifically, which is actually when he arguably reached his scoring peak, because I think that's when he was at his best as a jump shooter, and that's when he was making the most of the 3-point shot. I'm just so high on Larry's all-around offense because I think there's such value in somebody who can positively impact every possession in so many different ways. Somebody who is a massive shooting threat curling off of screens, somebody who is a constant cutting threat, somebody who is a constant presence on the offensive glass, especially considering his position. He's probably the best offensive rebounding small forward in NBA history because, again, he has power forward size. Somebody who has a passing ability to pick you apart out of pick and roll at times. He can absolutely dissect you out of the post. He can just make a quick little touch pass at any moment in time. He has eyes in the back of his head. His vision, his creativity is absolutely absurd. His craft as a scorer, the use of fakes and the difficult shot making, the combination of on-ball and especially off-ball value, one of the greatest off-ball players ever, who was always going to make the right decision, who was going to squeeze every last bit of his offensive value that he had. I just think there's several things that Larry is all-time great at when it comes to the off-ball value, the shot making, and of course the passing. So I'm really high on him, and I think the knock on Larry would be that he is not this sort of singular floor raiser like some of the guys who we have talked about. I mean, in these years with Larry, in games that he played, we don't have the specific on-off data, but in games he played, the Celtics were a +6 relative offense. In games he didn't play, we only have 19 of them, but they were still an above-average offense. They were like a +2 relative offense. So again, that does speak to, okay, there was some talent around him. 1989, when he misses almost the entire year, they're still a top 10 offense. Now, their offense did drop by almost 5 points from 1988 when Larry was on the court, so there's still a big difference there. But he did play with good talent, of course, in the front court, McHale and Parrish. But I always give him so much credit for how he made that situation work. Playing with a non-shooting point guard, playing with 2 volume post-up bigs, a guy who was 6'9", being able to be so versatile, so impactful in that offensive world. It's just so incredibly impressive to me. So there are guys who, like, at the end of the day, just had greater superpowers. Like, if you're just going to ask me, okay, who do you prefer to watch or who's got the more complete skill set, like, that's sort of the part of me that wants to say, oh, yeah, give me Larry over Shaq just because the feel is so incredible and all the different things he can do for you. At the end of the day, I just think Shaq's dominance, Shaq's unstoppability factor, it made him more valuable offensively. But versus all the guys who I have below him, I love the skill set with Larry so much. My knock on him would really be something that we already debated quite thoroughly, but the playoff scoring and dealing with elite athletes, and some of these rough runs don't coincide with his peak years that we're talking about, but just looking at Larry as a whole, dealing with those elite super athletic forwards. Obviously, he could struggle to get a step. You could definitely limit his ability to get to the basket and just overwhelm him physically a bit overall when it comes to his on-ball scoring. But again, he still had so many other ways to impact the game with off-ball scoring and passing and what he did in transition that I got to have Larry here. There was a time when I thought he was the 6th best offensive player ever. I'm a little lower on him now because I think there are a couple guys for whom it translated better to the playoffs and they just reached different heights of efficiency and leading crazy efficient team offenses. But I still think Larry is just such a complete offensive player. I have to have him here.
Yeah, Larry was my toughest cut. The one guy that I'm struggling with, I just can't believe you put him over Kareem. That's the one that I'm coming back to that I just struggle with a little bit more than the other guys. Just where, yeah, when I watch Kareem, I feel a different, and I know Larry's, I love Larry's malleability, all the little things that he can do. Kareem, I just feel like has a different level of inevitability when I watch him on tape and unstoppability where, yeah, I don't know. I really value Kareem's unstoppable scoring and just that was the subtle difference for me, like between a guy like Larry and a guy like Kareem where, and I know we have different, a little bit of difference in criteria where I did say at the top, I'm going to value the scoring a little bit more than the playmaking. And so maybe that's our difference here, but yeah, I just think Kareem's scoring translated in such a big way in the playoffs. And again, I come back to unstoppable and inevitable where I just feel like Kareem was a little bit harder to slow down, to fully – you can't shut down any of these guys, but I just feel like Kareem beats him as a scorer.
Oh, he absolutely beats him as a scorer. There's no question about that. The difference for me comes down to the little ways that Larry could impact every possession, the number of ways he could impact every possession, the off-ball value, the playmaking. That is stuff that I value a lot. I mean, we talked about this in the top 10 passers episode, but I really think just the level of processing that you had with him, the lightning quick decision-making, and the creativity as a passer and the ability to just in any action from anywhere on the floor positively impact the game is so special. He was so deceptive. His touch as a passer was ridiculous. His timing, his vision, he could find the bigs down low. He could create jump shots for teammates. Like, he could just really do it all. He was an elite transition passer, and obviously at his size, he had every angle available to him as a passer. That's what makes me so high on Larry. I think there's just so many ways to build a great offense around him is what it comes down to, and there is a value in that isn't going to show up necessarily in the box score, but I do think there's a reason that Larry overall led to higher heights of team offense than Kareem did, marginally so, but nevertheless he did, and so that is why I lean on him ultimately. It does come down to the sort of unstoppable scoring edge of Kareem versus the versatility and the feel of Larry, and I end up going with the latter because it matters to me a lot when we talk about, again, preferring this sort of ceiling-raising skill set. Larry just did so many things that boosted the ceiling of an offense by fitting in and making everybody around him better in all these different ways. So, Logan, who is in your sixth spot?
This is where I have Steve Nash, and Nash is one of the tougher players, I think, to rank because a lot of people turn to Nash's playoff shortcomings as a big knock on him in his career, and to that I would always ask, well, how is that Nash's fault? You know, like, we always do this attribution thing with the star player interrelated with team success. The Suns' offenses didn't drop off in the playoffs. You know, they just ran into great Spurs teams, you know, and
their defenses weren't good.
The thing that always held the Suns back was their defense.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, if you want to knock on Steve Nash for not being a great defender, okay, I'll hear that argument. You know, he's a tiny white guy. Like, yeah, you could pick on that guy. Okay, I'm not going to hear anything about his offenses. Again, shout out Data Baller for these advanced numbers that they have dating back to 2001 now to allow us to get some of these on-off numbers. Nash is leading out. Let's keep this in perspective. This is 05 to 07. Offenses that have an offensive rating of 117.4, nearly 13 points better in terms of on-off differential with Nash in the regular season, giving you 18 points and 11 assists a game on 50, 40, 90 splits with 63.1% true shooting, and then in the playoffs, giving you 21 points and 11 assists, again on 50, 40, 90 splits with 60% true shooting. Like, when we are thinking about starting from scratch, Nash has to be in this top six to me, where I can put the ball in his hands every single time. In transition, in the full court, in the half court, Nash is going to be a brilliant decision maker. He's going to be able to break down any defense. He's going to be able to get to his looks and make shots over the top of any defense. And the thing that stamps Nash in this top six to me, and that every single one of these players in my top six have in common, is they enhance everybody on the court, right? And Nash is one of these elite playmakers. Now, I want to make clear, I'm going to make a nuanced argument here, but the reason Nash isn't higher is because there are more elite scorers than him in the top five. And I really value that ability to impose yourself as a scorer more than anything else in basketball when it comes to the playoff context is my offensive number one. But one of the key arguments that people always make against Nash is that, he couldn't crank it up. That's bullshit. When Nash needed to be an elite scorer, he could. Is he one of these elite scorers in my top five? No, he's not. And that's the only thing that limits him. But Nash could crank it up while keeping that kind of efficiency. I have such an appreciation for Nash. I think I would hear an argument for him all the way up to number 4. There are guys that I think have a little more gravity or more physical imposition than him, and that's why he isn't in my top 5, but he's got to be on this list. He did it year in, year out. The fact that he doesn't have a ring. We've talked a lot about Nash over these past few weeks, so I don't want to beat a dead horse with him, but he is really underappreciated. The fact that he doesn't have a ring should not be held against him. what Nash could do offensively for you is up there with some of the greats of all time. And that's why he's here in my 6th spot, man. Steve Nash is the man.
He's a top 3 shooter in the history of the game. He's a top 2 passer in the history of the game. That's according to my own rankings. And when you are that masterful at those 2 skill sets, 2 of the most valuable that an NBA player can have, you're going to be one of the greatest offensive players ever. I have Steve Nash at number 6 as well, same years, 05 to 07. I mean, just the efficiency is so ridiculous with him. In the regular season, 19.1 league-adjusted points per 75 on plus 9.5% relative true shooting. Twice led the league in true shooting percentage as a guard before the three-point revolution. I mean, he spurred the first three-point revolution, right? The 7 seconds or less Suns embracing that more than anybody else. And Nash was the best three-point shooter in the NBA at the time, arguably. Shout out Ray Allen. But in terms of accuracy, Steve Nash was definitely the best. 12 assists per 75, 3.8 turnovers, no offensive rebounding value, obviously. It's Steve Nash. And then in the playoffs, 20.8 league-adjusted points per 75 on plus 7% relative true shooting still, 11 assists per 75, 3.9 turnovers. When you just look at the offensive impact numbers and you look at the heights of team offense he was leading to, I mean, you mentioned the offensive on-off differential. That's up there with any player to play the game in the years in which we have this data. And he's leading to a plus 10.8 on-court relative offensive rating. The only offenses to ever reach higher heights with one of these superstar players on the floor is Steph Curry's Warriors when they also had Kevin Durant. Like, there are people who will try to act as though Nash was the product of a system, as though Nash was the beneficiary of a lot of great play finishing talent alongside him. And he did have really good play finishing talent alongside him, right? He had Amare Stoudemire. And over these years, when he was on the floor without Amare, the Suns had a plus 9 relative offensive rating. They were an all-time great offense when Nash was on without Amare, which includes, by the way, the entirety of the 2006 season when they were still an elite offense. Same goes when Nash was on the court without Sean Marion. They had a plus 9 relative offensive rating. And if you look at the inverse minutes, Amare on with Nash off, Marion on with Nash off, the Suns were a completely average offense. And then when you have all 3 of them on, when you put all of the tools out there together, the Suns produced a plus 14.2 relative offensive rating over these years, which is just incomprehensible. When you talk about the greatest runs of team offense in NBA history, the Phoenix Suns of this era are at the very top of the list. I'm not saying you have to consider them the greatest offense ever, but in terms of the numbers in the regular season, they are. Like, especially for a run that goes for more than a half decade. Here are where the Suns ranked offensively, Logan, from 2005 to 2010 as relative offenses since 1960, okay? In 2005, they were the second best relative offense since 1960. Then they were the 57th best offense. That's the year that Amare missed the entire season, essentially. Then they were the 5th best offense since 1960. Then they were 41st. Then they were 51st. Then they were 4th. So again, when we look at these offenses relative to league average, 3 of the 5 greatest ever belonged to these Suns led by Steve Nash. Every single one of these offenses was number 1 caliber. It's the greatest run of team offense ever for a stretch this long. And this is coming off of 3 years in Dallas in which Nash was part of 3 of the top 20 relative offenses in NBA history, including the best ever in 04. So again, Nash wasn't the driving force of those offenses. He took a leap once he got to Phoenix, but it's still just an absolutely ridiculous, unparalleled run of one player being involved with so many of the greatest offenses ever. What I think is so unique about Nash is he has probably the best offensive process that we've ever seen when it comes down to doing everything possible to get a high percentage shot every time down. There was a quickness and an intention and yet a control with which Steve Nash attacked that was so special. Like, he was going to be super opportunistic in semi-transition situations whenever he could attack a defense that wasn't fully set, right? That was a huge pillar of the philosophy of the Suns offense. And he was going to move quickly, but again, always under control. People talk about the Nash dribble, the ability to keep a live dribble and just twist and knife your way through a defense and manipulate these guys however you want, because they know you're the best passer in the NBA, and you're a ridiculous interior passer who was producing numbers in terms of rim assists, right? Just spoon-feeding teammates layups and dunks that we've never seen in the history of this game. But you're also a guy who can make over 50% of your shots from the mid-range and is a lethal short-range touch shot maker, and you're quick and shifty as all hell, and you're this all-time great ball handler. Like, he was just always going to produce a high percentage shot. He was going to take his pick from the menu, and if it was a pass or if it was a shot, it was going to be extremely efficient offense, and he did that in a way that I don't know any other player in NBA history has. And that's why these Suns offenses were better than any other offense ever. Like, he's the best pick and roll player ever when it comes to manipulating the defense at every level, when it comes to the ridiculous shot making, when it comes to the all-time great playmaking value that he had, the jump passes, the ability to manipulate and fool defenses in that way where you're terrified of his mid-range game and he opens up a window for a pass, just the improvisation and the creativity in those spots, the anticipation. It's absolutely ridiculous. The touch on his passes, the placement, the lob passing, and the aggression. This is what we always talk about with Nash. The aggression, wanting to get that high leverage, super high efficiency shot every time down, never wanting to settle, going quickly, but never forcing up shots. Like, it's just so ridiculous. He's a 99th percentile jump shooter every year. The ability to do it off the dribble is absurd, where he's 50% from mid-range and he's 44% from three, right? Like, nobody has had a run of outlier jump shooting efficiency like Steve Nash, as we talked about in our top 10 shooters episode. He's a 97th percentile plus efficiency pick and roll creator every year at massive volume. Best pick and roll offensive player ever. He's a 95th percentile plus isolation scorer every year. Underrated shiftiness and shot making there. Like, nobody else has just been such an efficient offensive player, all things considered, especially considering the NBA that he was dropped into, this slow, sluggish, brutal, physical NBA that he alone in a lot of ways sped up, modernized offensively, took to another level, and was just so far beyond his peers. And you can't talk about Nash without talking about the elite transition passing, the elite hit-ahead passing. That's another thing when it comes to squeezing the value out of every possession. Like, he was just so great at that. Sometimes there are opportunities that are there that you don't have to work for. And it's just, do you identify them or do you not? And Nash identified those opportunities as well as any player to ever play the game. And like you said, he led all-time great playoff offenses. Like, they just lost because their defenses sucked. When we talk about offense, Steve Nash proved it all. I mean, when he was on the court from 2005 to 2010, the Suns were a +9 relative offense. That's absurd. That's better than like anybody else who we're going to talk about today in the playoffs. He showed he could take over a series with scoring, right? We talked about in the top 10 shooters episode, the 05 series against the Mavs, where they say, okay, we're going to shift our coverages to make you beat us as a scorer. And he dropped 40 a game on them in the second half of that series on absurd efficiency. I just think I couldn't really be higher on Nash's offense. Maybe I could. I guess I could have him higher than number 6, but every time I think about him, and the more you dive into his game, just the higher and higher you have to get on who he was as an offensive player, I think. There was a time, not long ago, like a year ago, where I made a video and I was like, there are 5 players with offensive GOAT cases, and here's who they all are, and here's what their cases are, and those are the 5 players who we haven't talked about yet. And now I'm like, how can I keep Nash out of that conversation? How can I say that there isn't an argument for Nash? Because when it comes to the playmaking peak and the hyper efficiency scoring and all the stuff that we've talked about, if you lead to the greatest offenses ever, like, and the through line is you and the offenses fall apart without you, like, you have to at least have an argument. Ultimately, I do think, like you said, other guys were more physically imposing. They could reach higher heights of volume, especially as scorers. Nash was very ball dominant, so there are players who deliver more off-ball value that I prefer in terms of versatility. But when it comes to just doing what he did, Steve Nash was absolutely ridiculous, an underrated scorer, and eternally underappreciated as one of the absolute greatest offensive players to ever play this game.
Yeah, I think this guy is appropriately appreciated, and some people may have him higher. I have a guy in a similar vein as Steve Nash, and I have Magic Johnson here in my 5 spot from 84 to 87. And really, my only knock on Magic is that he was just not more impactful as a scorer, where I feel like other guys are giving me similar gravity and, ability as playmakers, and just had more scoring imposition than Magic. But Magic is a guy that I think can get underrated as a scorer sometimes too, where if he needed to crank it up, he could. I mean, they always talk about how he was ahead of his time as a ball handler. Yeah, he really was. I mean, you just didn't have 6'9" point guards back then. And his size was one avenue for him creating easier offense at the time. Magic, in the assist numbers, just literally boggle your mind when you look at it in tandem with the efficiency. In the regular season, 20 points per game, 13 assists per game, 61.7% true shooting. And in the playoffs, 20 points per game, 14 assists per game on 60.2% true shooting. And you go back and you look at the regular season or the playoffs, the Lakers aren't just the best offense in basketball. They are lapping anybody in competition with these guys. So I have Magic here at number 5 because I think there are better scorers above him. I think there are guys who had more gravity. But if you wanted to have Magic in any of these top 5 spots, I wouldn't push back. I mean, Magic's the greatest passer ever. I think the greatest playmaker ever. Like, I'm not going to knock you if you have him in any of these top 5 spots, but those are the only knocks that I would have on Magic is the scoring in position and the gravity. But Magic's leading. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, by like 10 points per game sometimes when you look at some of these scoring numbers, man, the Lakers are, I mean, it's not close. You keep mentioning like this relative offense. Magic's doing exactly what Nash was.
Yeah, it's the closest thing, and I mean, they really do stand head and shoulders above the rest there, and that's where I have some issue with you explicitly stating in your criteria that you value scoring more than playmaking, just because I wouldn't view it in such absolute terms. Like, at the end of the day, scoring value, scoring threat is something all great offensive players are going to have in common, because you have to be able to threaten the defense, to draw defensive coverages that allow you to create opportunities for teammates. But in terms of just absolute offensive value, like, there is clearly the reality here that the 2 greatest passers in NBA history, in my opinion, Magic and Nash, led to the 2 greatest runs of team offense in NBA history. And there is an ability to amplify their teammates. There is an ability to take over as a scorer with hyper efficiency as needed. And the thing is, like, these all-time great passers, in some ways, they just had the answers to the test more than anybody else because they saw everything. And so there wasn't a coverage you could throw at them that they wouldn't be able to fit through and find an answer to and make some crazy aggressive interior pass that just gets through by the skin of their teeth that nobody else was going to see or attempt or make. And the transition value you get from both these guys, especially Magic Johnson, the greatest transition player in the history of this game. Like, I have Magic at number 5 as well, but I think we have to acknowledge how supreme the playmaking value here is, how much that does enhance team offense, and how often these guys get sold short because people look at scoring and they just miss the holistic picture of these guys delivering passing value unlike anything we've ever seen. These guys being underrated as scorers because they chose to be playmaking first players. But Magic is another guy who could twist up the defense however he wanted, and the scoring threat was very real. He's just incredible. He's an absolute marvel. I think there's clearly a case for him. If you are somebody who is like, I just want that quarterback. I want that point guard who is going to dominate the ball and who is going to lead to elite offensive results for my team, and I can just trust them every possession. Magic and Nash are the 2 guys who you look at there, and they do it in very different ways, obviously, just in terms of size, and their style as scorers are completely different, but the philosophy in a lot of ways is the same. The aggression, the creativity as passers, emphasizing, again, getting the easy stuff wherever you can, dialing down the scoring volume, but being super efficient there. In that way, they do have similarities, a lot of them. Magic in the regular season from 87 to 90, 21.5 league-adjusted points per 75. Like, that scoring is underrated. On plus 7% relative true shooting with, as you mentioned, 11.9 assists. I do think an edge that he does have over Nash is just the reality of his size and how that allows him to impact the game in certain ways on the margins. I mean, I specifically look at offensive rebounding, him giving you 1.4 per 75. That matters. 3.8 turnovers. Magic, kind of high turnover numbers, but considering all the home runs he was hitting, I am more than happy to live with that. And then in the playoffs, 20 league-adjusted points per 75, still plus 7% relative true shooting, still 11.9 assists, and the turnovers actually go down to 3.4. This guy led 3 number 1 offenses in these 4 years. I think the 87 Lakers as an individual team have an argument for being the greatest offense ever because they had a top 10 relative offense ever in the regular season, and then one of the absolute greatest playoff relative offenses that we've ever seen. They had a 120 offensive rating in the playoffs in 1987, just like stupid stuff. And again, we don't have the on-off data with Magic, but we do have the games that he missed and the games that he played, and there's a 9.4 point swing there. Now, there's only 20 games that he missed in this period, but I mean, they were a negative 2.2 relative offensive rating when Magic was off. When he's on, they're a plus 7.2 relative offensive rating. These are just games that he missed completely versus games that he played. And then if you look at the year that Magic retires, 1992, after 91, they drop off to being an average offense. They take like a 5-point drop in offensive rating. So there's so many indicators here that Magic belongs in this top 5, obviously. And in the early years, he and Kareem, their offensive superpowers are very much interrelated. And then you get to the late 80s and it's like, okay, Kareem is kind of just a husk out there. Oh, and now Kareem is retired. And Magic is still leading them to be the number 1 offense or a top tier offense every single year. Just the ability to elevate his teammates. I do think versus Nash, I mean, again, they share so much philosophically in terms of the aggression. Magic was able to do it while adding 6 inches of height. And the deception that he had as a passer and the creativity, I think, is second to none in the history of this game. Another guy who was just spoon-feeding layups and elite scoring opportunities to his teammates. He could do that in all these different ways. As a scorer, underrated when it comes to the pick and roll game, the post-up game that he had where he could be a walking mismatch, really good scoring touch, good foul drawer, an elite free throw shooter. And again, when it comes to transition, like nobody was ever more adamant about getting out in transition every possession than Magic's Lakers. Like you mentioned the difference in points per game. Well, they're lapping all these teams in offensive efficiency. They're also playing at this ridiculous breakneck pace, and Magic was at his best there. In terms of transition passing, he's the best that we've ever seen. And just with his size, 6'9", his ball handling, his unique fluidity and agility for that size at that time, he's just a total freak. He's a total alien. To be the level of skilled player and passer that he was at that size, you really just can't say anything other than this guy led a top 2 offensive run in NBA history, led, I believe, 7 number 1 offenses overall for the Lakers throughout this decade. My only knock on him would be similar to Nash. I mean, ball dominant, so not delivering the level of off-ball value of some of the guys above him, and then didn't have that peak takeover scoring gear. But again, we're just nitpicking. In the top 6, we are truly nitpicking, and honestly, more so than a matter of fact, it's a matter of preference. Because if you're going to say, why do I care that Magic couldn't get off the ball when him being on the ball led to a top 2 offensive run in NBA history? I would say, fair. I get that. Why do I care if he can't reach this takeover scoring gear when the playmaking always translated at the highest level? Fair. I get that. We're just making picks on the margins here. And who is our ideal player to build around? I think a couple of the other guys, they give me more options to build around. And that's why I would lean on them over Magic very marginally.
Well said. In my 4 spot, I don't think it's as much of a debate as if this guy should be on the list, is which version of this player do you take. I've got LeBron from 2016 to 2018 are the years that I went with, although I would hear an argument for Miami LeBron. I think Miami LeBron has an advantage in off-ball scoring and shooting. That's when, LeBron was at this nice balance of rim pressure and elite jump shooting, where LeBron actually peaked as a jump shooter, and we've talked about this a lot early on in his Los Angeles career as just a pure jump shooter. But I think Miami LeBron gives you that perfect blend of athleticism, rim pressure, and jump shooting. But I went with 2016 to 2018 LeBron because I think that's when he is just at his most in control, completely dissecting defenses and running offense at his best when I think he was just at his most brilliant. In the regular season, he was giving you 26 points and 8 assists per game on 61% true shooting. In the playoffs, he ups his scoring to 31 points per game and 8 assists per game on even better efficiency, 61.8% true shooting. The Cavs of this era are giving you an offensive rating of 117.2 with LeBron on the court, and he improved them by 12.5 points versus when he was off the court. And I, like you said, man, I mean, we're picking nits. I don't have a ton of knocks on this version of LeBron. I think he was an elite decision maker. I think he was still bringing you that kind of rim pressure and gravity, But it truly is the decision-making that I'm getting from LeBron that makes him so high. I don't think there was a coverage that you could throw at LeBron that he didn't know how to dissect. LeBron was going to put you into the action every single time at a pick and roll. He was either going to get downhill, he was going to get to the shot he likes on the perimeter, or he's going to find an open teammate and get a great look. Like, I just think this version of LeBron is bringing you elite offensive value every time down the floor. The only knock that I could have on this version of LeBron is rigidity, in where I think he's going to have the ball in his hands basically the entire time. I don't think he's bringing you a ton of off-ball scoring value the way my top three guys are. But again, if you wanted to say, why does that even matter? Like you said with Magic and Steve Nash, I hear you. Because, I mean, this version of LeBron is a guy that, before he got older, could take this kind of offensive load and just every time down the court, make the right decision, get to an open look, find his teammate an open shot. Like, this version of LeBron has you eating out of the palm of his hands every time down the floor. And if someone wanted him to have him in the top three, if they wanted to have him number one, I have no issue. I would hear that argument. So it really is a matter of preference, I think, on where you have LeBron and which version of LeBron you're going with. I have 2016 to 2018 here in my 4 spot.
Same here, and this between him and my number 3, it's like so subjective, and I agonized over it myself. I ended up preferring the ceiling that is unlocked with my number 3. We'll get to that conversation, but in terms of floor raising, I mean, 2016 to 2018 LeBron, bro, he's improving his offenses by 14 points in terms of offensive rating when he's on the court compared to off it. Like, what the hell, man? There's only one guy on this list with a higher number than that. It's even a little bit higher than Nash. It's even a little bit higher than Steph Curry. And he's leading his team to a plus 8.3 on-court relative offensive rating, which isn't quite as high as those other guys, but it's still extremely, extremely high. And it's just some of the more remarkable offensive carry jobs we've ever seen at this point from LeBron. I do think we were going with all 3-year stretches, 3 to 5 year stretches. 2017 and 2018, LeBron does get better offensively compared to 2016. I think he takes a step back defensively, especially compared to like the 2016 playoffs where he was still balls to the wall defensively. But as a mismatch attacker, as a shooter, and as a playmaker, I think he's just better across the board in 17 and 18. As a playoff performer, his volume goes up even higher. And like you said, the reason that I went with these years instead of the Heat years when, yes, the jump shooting efficiency is really good and the scoring efficiency overall peaks and the off-ball value peaks, the athleticism is arguably at its peak, the control that he had over the game, it was just remarkable. You felt like you were just watching a surgeon who's 6'9", 250 and an absolute freight train, but can just pick out whoever he wants to target, whatever he wants to get into, and just kind of relentlessly work his way to a good shot. Like the 2018 finals, game 1, when he dropped 50, it was such a masterclass. And it's such an embodiment of this phase of LeBron where it's like, hey, Steph, you're coming into the action every single fucking time. We are going to make you work. We are going to make you guard. And if I ever get that switch, it's over. His post-up game, his power game was so built out at this point. This is when LeBron's strength peaked. To me, he had like that old man strength, but, you know, he was still like 33, so he wasn't old yet. And just incredible in that way. And then as a catch and shooter, he was really good in 17 and 18. He was not so good in 2016. Not a good three-point shooting year for him overall. And then, yeah, the decision-making, just like out of pick and roll, being able to make so many different passes, being the best skip passer ever, being, I would say, the best kick-out passer ever, just being the best ever at manufacturing three-pointers for his teammates as a passer. And then also a good interior passer, good feel with his bigs, like really special stuff. 17 and 18, he's creating with like 90th percentile efficiency out of pick and roll and post-ups at massive volume. And so you look at all this stuff, you look at the volume production, you look at the impact, you look at in the playoffs, 29.2 league adjusted points per 75 on plus 7% relative true shooting, 7.8 assists, 1.4 offensive rebounds, 3.8 turnovers per 75, a little bit high there, but it's just so hard to come up with a criticism for this version of LeBron. All I could really say is he wasn't a great off-ball player, but at this point, LeBron was still a solid off-ball player. Like, it's really in LA where his value there has diminished further because he just like totally stopped cutting and leveraging his athleticism in that way. But he was still a good cutter at this time. He was a good low-volume catch-and-shoot guy in 17 and 18. Nevertheless, ultimately, quite ball-dominant, a little bit turnover-prone, kind of just okay off-ball value. But you look at the context, and it's like, all right, 2018 especially, when Kyrie is gone, it's kind of the ultimate, hey, take this group of bums and just pick them up. And LeBron was that guy because he could so directly impose himself on every single possession on ball. I guess the only other knock I would have is the lack of like elite, reliable, over-the-top shot making as a scorer. But he was able to physically impose himself so consistently that he was a ridiculously effective scorer at this time. It was a real debate for me between him and the guy in my 3-spot, Logan. I'm interested in if we have the same fellow there. Steph Curry is the guy who I was really debating up against LeBron. Are we in lockstep, or do you have Steph higher?
Wow. No, I have Steph in my 3-spot as well. That's not who I thought you were going to go with.
We're locked in. We're locked in, twin. So why did you land on the Steph side of this debate? Because I think in a lot of ways, like, these guys represent just contrasting philosophies of offense. And it's who would you rather build around? Again, not necessarily, I guess, who's more effective in a vacuum, just sort of which do you prefer?
No, it is a philosophical difference to me. I think that's well said. I think Steph's gravity is what puts him over the top. And there is a difference, because I think that if you wanted to say it's LeBron because of his physical imposition and unstoppability on the game, like his, strength and size aspect of it and his floor raising, I would hear that argument. To me, Steph is more malleable, and his shooting is just the greatest weapon, I think, in the history of basketball. Like, how much attention he requires on ball and off ball. And that's where I really think Steph is lapping this version of LeBron. I think Steph can be that on ball kind of weapon, but you've got to defend the guy for all 48 minutes, and you can't leave him alone. And if you fall asleep for a second, it's in your mouth. Like, he is just dropping it from 30 feet out. Like, that's the difference to me, is the off-ball scoring weapon that Steph is and the gravity. I actually went with 2021 to 2023 Steph Curry. I think his scoring translated in the playoffs better. I think that his peak relative to the league is definitely 2016, because teams just didn't know what they were dealing with. But I actually prefer Steph's physical attributes, and I would hear an argument. I think relative to the league, he was probably lapping them more like 2015 to 2018. But Steph's physicality and ability to get downhill is what I really prefer in that 2021 to 2023 run. But, I mean, you can take any version of Steph, I think, between those years. But, yeah, I don't have anything really negative to say about LeBron. I really think it's a philosophical difference. And if we were looking at these guys purely as offensive players, I just prefer what Steph does to the team offense. And we were mentioning this earlier with SGA, and I think because all these guys enhance lackluster talent around them, right? Like, we're talking about LeBron taking a group of bums with the ball in his hands. I think Steph can kind of get underappreciated in that regard with how defensively slanted Warriors lineups have been for so long. I'm not digging on these guys, but and Draymond does so much for the team defense, right? But having a guy like Draymond, and he's a great playmaker too. He's not a zero offensively, but him being so limited as a scorer, right?
Yeah.
Draymond isn't as viable in other offensive situations the way he is with Steph Curry, but I would go deeper than that. Gary Payton II, right? Like there are other guys that where you can go towards these way more defensively slanted lineups because of how great Steph is as a weapon. And again, you can make this argument, I think, for a lot of these guys in the top 5, but with Steph, I just think it's to a different level, and that's why I prefer Steph.
It's absurd. I mean, the impact on spacing is completely unparalleled. We talk about Shaq being the greatest gravitational force from inside the paint, and Steph is far and away, completely beyond comparison, the greatest gravitational force when it comes to pulling defenses outside the paint and opening up the paint for his teammates. And ultimately, that to me is even more valuable than what Shaq did. The lineups that have been not just functional but elite offensively with Steph Curry on the floor are incomprehensible. Like all the years that they've played two non-shooters alongside him and like no ball handlers who can create for themselves. And yet you look up and it's like, oh, the Warriors are an elite offense when Steph is on the floor and the Warriors suck when Steph is off the floor. That value has held up even to like this year, right? I mean, he's still doing that stuff. But when you look at his absolute peak, I agree with you when you say that he was lapping the league by the most circa 2016. I went with that 2016 to 2019 run overall. We've had the conversation. I think in a vacuum, 2021 Steph Curry was a better basketball player, but we're judging relative to era. And there are these subtle differences year over year, these changes league-wide in strategy, and the league gets slightly better pretty much every year. So I'm still judging these players by, okay, when were you outpacing the league by your most? That's when your value was at its peak. And that's where I think Steph Curry 2016 to 2019 is the choice. What I've always said with Steph is he's probably the best offensive ceiling raiser ever, meaning you put talented players alongside him. You put good play finishers alongside him. You put guys who need the ball in their hands, guys who can make good decisions with the ball, playing off of Steph and his constant off-ball threat and his ability to pull defenses out 30, 35 feet away from the basket. And his impact is going to translate in a way that is very rare historically, because so many of these other guys, to different extents, they need the ball in their hands to be impactful, which means they're taking the ball out of the hands of somebody else, which means maybe to some extent that slightly diminishes the value of that other guy who is at the best with the ball in their hands, right? Steph Curry is the exception to that because his off-ball value is so completely absurd. And obviously, you drop Kevin Durant on a team and like it's going to be pretty easy to make that offense work. But I do think uniquely so when you're adding him to a team with Steph Curry and also a team that had already posted a top 3 relative offense in NBA history the year before KD joined the team, and another all-time great offense in 2015 when it was just being built around Steph. He is by so far the off-ball GOAT. He is by so far the shooting GOAT. And this is what's interesting. We're talking about gravity here, and that's really the case for Steph. And it's not something that is as easy to quantify with certainly the basic numbers. Like, if you look at scoring volume, I mean, Steph's great, right? In the regular season, 29 league-adjusted points per 75. In the playoffs, 27. The efficiency is GOAT level, plus 10% relative true shooting in the regular season, plus 7% in the playoffs. The passing numbers are very good, 6.7 assists per 75 in the regular season, 6 assists per 75 in the playoffs. But obviously, that's not going to capture his total offensive impact because he does so many things that quietly impact each possession. And that's where the fact that this dude, when he was on the court, his teams reached higher heights of offense than anybody who we've talked about today, even higher than Nash's Suns with him on the court, plus 11.3 on-court relative offensive rating and a plus 13.5 offensive on-off swing, which is really right there with LeBron. LeBron's is just a tiny, tiny bit higher over this specific sample. And when we talked about the top 10 scorers ever, I know you did a lot of taxing Steph and KD both for the years that they played together. So I specifically isolated going outside of the specific peak that I've highlighted here just a bit, because 2015 and 2021, to me, those are still peak Steph seasons. It's just like we're keeping it to these 3 to 5 year runs. So I went with his 4 absolute best seasons, although 2021 would be there. It's just outside of this specific run because 2020 he gets hurt. But across 2015, 2016, and 2021. So those are Steph's 3 peak years when KD was not on the team. He had over a plus 10 offensive on-off and led him to a plus 7.3 on-court relative offensive rating. All the way from 2015 to 2019. If Steph was on the court without KD, he had them as a plus 9 relative offense, all-time great. When KD was on the court without Steph, not nearly the same results. So this is where the LeBron versus Steph conversation comes down to impact. That's what we're trying to judge. And the impact is so close, but the ways in which they do it are so different. It comes down to this feeling of unstoppability with LeBron physically imposing himself, especially once you get to, again, 2018, where now the league is much more inclined to switch, right? And the defensive scheme is modernized in that way. But that honestly favors LeBron because he's like maybe the greatest mismatch attacker ever. So his value is peaking in that way of just that forceful imposition. But then you do have the impact on every single possession of a Steph Curry. The fact that there are 5 sets of eyes on him at all times. The fact that he at any moment can pull from 35 feet on the ball and he can draw 2 to the ball, which creates a 4-on-3 for his teammates at a level that nobody else ever has. The fact that he can create so many advantages away from the basketball entirely, where somebody else is able to cleanly operate one-on-one like a Kevin Durant, because Steph Curry is there on the opposite wing drawing defensive attention. The number of just wide open rim attempts that he creates for his teammates because he's curling off of an off-ball screen and everybody is looking at him and they just completely lose the guy who's setting the screen, who slips right to the basket. We've seen it so many times. And I do think, although it's difficult to exactly quantify that, there's a reason that the ceiling that Steph-led offenses have reached is even higher than that we've seen from LeBron. And so that's where I do think you have this contrast of on-ball in position, which is so obvious and in your face with LeBron and so consistent and inevitable, versus that supreme off-ball value. And it's interesting to make it a conversation about floor raising versus ceiling raising. You can definitely do that. I almost think it's more so about a conversation of game-to-game offensive floor individually versus game-to-game offensive ceiling, where I think Steph clearly has the lower floor in terms of his individual production and the higher ceiling, just because when he catches an absolute heater as a jump shooter, the ceiling there is absolutely absurd. But when it comes to what you're doing in a team context, I think it's easy to underrate Steph the floor raiser. Because when we think about floor raising, we think about, I have the ball in my hands. I'm dictating every possession, right? Very LeBron-esque, or Russell Westbrook 2017, like I was talking about earlier. But Steph is also one of the absolute greatest floor raisers ever, because nobody else has ever just created easy opportunities for their teammates away from the ball like him. And he's also shown an ability to ramp up his offensive volume on the ball, like we saw in 2021, when he's a 32-point-per-game scorer on ridiculous efficiency and is carrying truly an abysmal offensive supporting cast, worse than anything LeBron has ever had to work with, a group that was dead last in offensive rating before he joined the team. And when he's on the court, they're a legitimately good offense. That ability of Steph Curry, that gravity, it does take the slight edge for me, because we've seen it produce GOAT-level results when you put him alongside good talent. And we've also seen some of the best floor raising ever out of him, improving that offense by 11 points in 2021 with zero help on that team. I think one of the coolest stats with Steph is in his peak years, he increased his team's rim volume when he was on the court compared to off it as much as LeBron did. That's the value of Steph Curry, right? You have LeBron, who is the Mount Rushmore rim pressurer himself, and then you have the greatest shooter ever, who on a team level is having as much of an impact on rim offense because of all he is doing to draw the defense to him further away and to open up the paint, to be such a constant threat. The impact, the panic, the constant stress of a Steph Curry. I do think you can reach higher heights building an offense around Steph. And although, yes, this is largely about preference at this point, I don't think that's theoretical, because I think you can look at the years before Kevin Durant joined the team, and 2015 and 2016, both of those offenses were substantially better than any of LeBron's offenses with the Cavs. So the more talent you add, absolutely, Steph's offense maintains more value than LeBron's does. But when I look at it holistically, in terms of what I value when it comes to offensive impact, I do think the ceiling with Steph, it's just higher by enough to give him the nod, even though I acknowledge, right, the 2016 finals, that's a low in terms of Steph individual offense that LeBron doesn't experience at this point in time. But I think on average, give me Steph.
I think so too. That rim pressure number is fascinating.
It's Steph, man. It's the gravity. It's real. It's very real.
I'm just shocked. I don't know. That wasn't where I expected you to go. I thought Steph might be number 2 or number 1 for you on your list.
Oh, interesting. All right, well, who's your number 2, my friend?
I've got Nikola Jokic here in my 2 spot.
Okay.
2023 to 2026.
Talk to me. Tell me why.
I think when we look at Jokic in comparison to Steph and LeBron, this is where those little itty-bitty offensive traits and skills and malleability really matter to me, where Jokic has a versatility, I think, virtually kind of unmatched by any of these guys that we're talking about today, where you have got the perimeter shooting that you rarely get from a big man, where over this time span, he's 39% from deep in the regular season and 38% from deep in the playoffs. But he's also giving you some of that offensive rebounding value, while he's also giving you off-ball scoring gravity, while he's also giving you an ability to score from the post, Well, he's also one of the elite screeners and roll mans
Yeah.
and poppers. There's just unmatched versatility with Jokic, where he's also just strong as an ox and can mismatch attack at such a high level. It's incredible. Over this span, he's giving you 27 points, 10 assists on 59, 39, 82 splits, 67% true shooting. I mean,
Oh, sweet mother.
numbers that just warp your brain. In the playoffs, he's giving you 29 points and 9 assists per game on 61.7% true shooting, and the most mind-boggling number, he's producing a 126.4 offensive rating over this time span when he's on the court, improving his offense by nearly 17 points versus him off the floor. It's incredible. I mean, it is just, he's the total package, man. He is giving me just this unreal versatility, efficiency, and volume. There's just one guy that I think is just surpassed by Jokic, and it's just because of his ability to put the ball in the basket that I prefer. But I would hear an argument for Jokic at number one, and I really wouldn't push back that much. But there's one guy, and it's Michael Jordan, that I just think his scoring ability has been unmatched in NBA history. But Jokic makes a damn good case at number one.
MJ at one. I thought it was going to be Boobie Gibson. What happened to Boobie Gibson? You're lower
I
on
thought
him now?
about it. I thought about it. Actually, I think I'm going to give it to Grievous Vasquez. I know.
I love that
it's
take.
bold. Maybe
I'm going to
Steve
go with
Novak.
Kendall Marshall.
Maybe Prime.
I'm valuing pure point guards. They
Okay.
need to make a comeback. Somebody give Kendall Marshall a call.
Kendall-
Tyus Jones, now Jokic's teammate. It's coming back.
How did that guy get another job? I was surprised he got signed after the
Terrible.
disastrous season that he's had.
Just terrible. I actually hate pure point guards.
What
bro.
you don't
Anybody who
realize,
listens to Nerd
Carson,
Sesh
is-
knows that.
He's actually the secret weapon for the Phoenix Suns, and he's going to save the Orlando Magic this season.
Oh, both. Wow.
Assist-to-turnover ratio is the only thing that matters in this life.
Only thing that matters to me. Well, Logan, you said you've heard the case for Jokic as the offensive GOAT, or you would hear it. You have heard it many times from your boy. I've been saying for 2 years, Nikola Jokic is the greatest offensive player in NBA history. And today, I have him at number 2 on my list. So I think that I was wrong. And this is still an open conversation. This is the reality, right? I mean, new information can slightly change my opinion. And I just think some of the struggles we have seen Jokic have in the postseason, specifically against the Thunder, it's just significant enough to give him that tiny little knock to put him above Michael Jordan, who is my number one as well. That being said, I do think Jokic is definitely the regular season offensive GOAT. When you just talk about like value over an 82-game regular season, he's really solved the sport. If you don't get into the particular of like, oh, this one nightmare matchup, like just on an average night, the heights of scoring efficiency you get with him, the playmaking volume, the complementary stuff he does that you mentioned, the offensive impact, just like the seamless processing and the inevitability of, all right, I'm either going to get to a hyper-efficient shot myself or create one for my teammates, and I'm going to impact the game on the offensive glass and as a screener and all this different stuff. Like, I couldn't take anybody over that version of Jokic. And that's basically been my argument. And I'll go through the whole argument that I have made for Jokic as being the offensive GOAT and then just explain why I do have him a tiny bit lower than I had previously. And honestly, I wasn't even sure what I was going to do coming into this episode. I ended up going with what felt right at this moment. It could change again down the line. Jokic is an effectively unstoppable one-on-one post scorer. And that's where I've always felt he's underrated as an offensive player. That is until Logan ranked him the number 3 scoring peak in NBA history. And then I said, hold on a second. He's being overrated as a scorer by my dear co-host here. But the fact that he has this combination of overwhelming strength, elite footwork, elite craft, so many counters, but he also doesn't even need that many counters usually because the combination of power that he has with this GOAT paint touch means he can produce a 60 to 65% shot himself at will. I mean, over these years, 2023 to 2026, he's 62% in the paint outside the restricted area at massive volume. That's layup efficiency that he can get to pretty much whenever he wants. And it just gives him a ridiculous ability to consistently impose himself, to get to those bread and butter shots. That is, of course, if you let him beat you as a scorer on an island. But a lot of teams are going to double to avoid that. And then that's where the brilliant Jokic playmaking comes in and is ultimately his greatest superpower as an offensive player, his passing even more so than his scoring. But the versatility as a scorer is absurd because he's the best post scorer in basketball, easily. He's a top 5 post scorer in NBA history, in my opinion. And then he also has these dimensions of scoring in terms of versatility that just set him apart from so many other big men, basically every other big man in NBA history, save like Dirk Nowitzki. But he's an elite mid-range scorer. Over 49% from mid-range in this time. Like you mentioned, over 39% from 3. And it's not just the ability to knock down standstill jumpers off the catch, right? He does it off movement. He does it off the pop. And then you have the ridiculous play finishing as a roller where those floaters are 60+% shots for him. And the ability to cut is so unique, the way that he is used as a big man in that way. And then you have the elite offensive rebounding on top of that, which is so special. Like, the margins are an area where Jokic is so exceptional. I'm so glad that you mentioned that when you're talking about him versus Steph and LeBron, because there is a consistency there. There is an impact possession to possession, and there is a variety that I do think makes me prefer him compared to those other two guys. I mean, he's got just the best combination of off-ball value, being able to do it in a number of ways, but then also having like this A++ action that he can get into and physically impose himself and get to a high percentage shot directly himself over and over again that matters so much in the clutch. I mean, and in playoff environments, when you can dominate that short intermediate area like Jokic has been able to overall, it just translates so well, so consistently. And then he's a superhuman processor. The guy's got eyes in the back of his head. He's one of the most creative passers we've ever seen. And he can do it in so many different ways. Like, he's a brilliant post-up passer. Dotting up cutters, he's the best we've ever seen. Finding shooters, he's a genius. And then he can make so many different passes from so many different spots on the floor. He's a brilliant handoff hub. He's an all-time great outlet passer. I would argue the best that we've ever seen. The guy can run inverted pick and roll, and he can pick you apart, seeing over top and hitting skip passes at times, and just like doing all these things that are incomprehensible from a big man. And that's so special because when you can give me A+ scoring value and A+ passing value, and then you're doing all of the big man stuff that Jokic does, we've never seen a combination like that in NBA history. And that's why I would say Jokic is probably the easiest all-time great to play off of because he impacts every possession. His touches are through the roof, right? You're going to feel his impact every possession, but he's not going to dominate the ball. And he's going to do it in so many different ways that it's like, if you're a great pull-up shooting guard like Jamal Murray, well, phenomenal. This guy is going to free you up with screens. He's going to free you up with his gravity off the roll. You're going to get a bunch of good looks as a shooter. And if teams try to put 2 on you for a single second, now you've got the best possible option to pick them apart with 4-on-3s, or if you give him any space off the roll, what he can do is a touch shooter. A dunker spot threat like Aaron Gordon. This is a guy who is going to find a player like Gordon repeatedly. And as a center, the ability to play with a guy like that and some of the spacing that Jokic has been able to operate with in recent years, where the Nuggets are towards the bottom of the league in three-point volume and they're still elite offenses. It's so special. And then any spot-up shooter, obviously, is going to amplify so much, like pretty much all these great playmakers. But that ability to positively impact every offensive possession in so many different ways is unrivaled. And this is what I've said for years. It's like, Larry's an amazing offensive player, Larry Bird. Jokic is the next evolution of that in so many different ways, even bigger, even stronger, different level of efficiency, like absolutely what he can do in terms of the paint touch scoring, but he has that same superhuman feel and versatility. And so that's where I think on a default night, his impact, his production, his efficiency, all those things considered, it's the best that we've seen. In the playoffs, though, I mean, there is a little drop. It's not a significant drop, but it's a little drop where he goes from 26.5 league adjusted points per 75 to 25.4. And the efficiency goes from better than plus 9% true shooting to plus 4% true shooting. And the assists go from 10.3 to 8.5. So overall, when we talk about the offensive impact metrics, like you said, he's got the biggest on-off swing of anybody, even bigger than Steph, even bigger than Nash, even bigger than LeBron. And he's leading his team to a plus 9.5 on-court relative offensive rating, which is absurd. And included in this peak, we don't even have 2022, what he did when MPJ and Jamal Murray were out, and that was just an absurd carry job. Right? He's done it all. He's proven everything. Like I said, probably the easiest guy to play off of offensively in NBA history. However, in the playoffs, I just think MJ's record is so flawless. And I think we have seen Jokic, relative to this incredibly high GOAT level standard, just struggle a bit versus Minnesota and OKC over the last couple years. I think we have seen the inconsistency of his three-point shot in some of those small sample size settings, getting him where if you can force him to rely on that shot more because you're overwhelming him more off the roll and out of the post with this swarm, or in the case of Minnesota with an elite roamer like Rudy Gobert who can affect him as an interior defender, then that's going to lead to a little bit of a dip in Jokic's offensive effectiveness. And I think we've seen a slight drop in the playmaking value. I think part of this is because of the configuration of the spacing around him. Like a guy like Christian Braun not being able to make open catch and shoot threes. If he could, I think Jokic's assist numbers would look a little bit better. But I also think when teams really crowd the paint, they can take away the availability of some of those passing angles to cutters that Jokic feasts off of in the regular season. And I think what it really comes down to is just he can be a bit rushed by elite speed or by that monstrous roaming defender. You can clog up the area from which he's operating in a way that just makes life a little bit harder on him as an offensive player overall. And the scoring efficiency drops from GOAT level to just very good in the playoffs. And the scoring volume can be limited just a tad. We've seen the Thunder do it where they just deny him out of the post entirely. And they have very unique options. So I think it's unfair to say, oh, because he hasn't been his best against this GOAT level defense that everybody struggles against, that's a knock on Jokic. But again, we're talking about him up against Michael Jordan. So Jokic's 2023 playoffs offensively, I think, are the best ever. I mean, the production is 30, 13, and 10 on 65% true shooting. Stupid. And he did that in tough matchups. He did that against Bam Adebayo. He did that against Anthony Davis. He did that against Rudy Gobert. Like, that was absurd. The last two postseasons, though, have been a level down from that. I mean, his playoff numbers are still ridiculous. Since 2021, his last 5 playoff runs, he's 29, 13, and 8 on 61.5% true shooting. So I do think, like, if you just don't have the personnel, the heights of impact that Jokic can reach are probably the best ever, all things considered. But when I look at, like, the nightmare matchup for Jokic, I just think it's a little bit more problematic than anything Michael Jordan ever dealt with. I think there are just slightly more ways to scheme to make Jokic uncomfortable if you have the perfect personnel. That's why I have him at number 2. Still, the value is so ridiculous overall. It's so consistent. I couldn't have him lower than this. And again, there's sort of a difference in what do you prefer? Do you prefer the guy who is going to touch the ball every possession and have this massive passing volume like a Jokic does? And again, everything runs through him in all these ways. Or the leanness of Michael Jordan's game. Which do you prefer? Ultimately, to me, it's not so much about that as it is just the inevitability of Jordan's scoring value and him being goated in so many different ways that just gave him the slight edge for me. When I thought about who would I want, who am I more confident in walking into a playoff run? Michael Jordan from 1990 to 1993 or Nikola Jokic from 2023 to 2026? When I put a gun to my own head and I did it, the answer was Michael Jordan.
I reached the same conclusion as well, and this may not be the best way to view it, but I thought about it. I was like, what are defenses, what was their game plan versus Michael Jordan in the playoffs? Kill him. That was their conclusion. We have to kill this guy every time he comes to the basket.
Some would argue Lou Dort suggested that the Thunder have the same tactics, but they also clearly have very real tactics that do work.
Yeah, that's a good point, too. That was Lou Dort's conclusion. I don't blame him.
A lot of the tactics with Jokic have been triple team and maul and be super physical, but I don't want to see anybody doing any fucking OKC ref stuff. What Lou Dort did was dirty, but they legitimately defend the hell out of him.
But that was the conclusion the Pistons reached. They said, yep, we just got to take this guy out. We got to obliterate him every time he comes to the basket. And I agree. That was the same question I asked myself. Who am I more confident going into a playoff run? It's Michael Jordan's unstoppable scoring. And one of the misconceptions or bad faith arguments that people make about Jordan are about playmaking primarily.
Yeah.
Where Jordan could pass the hell out of the ball. And you talk about that leanness, the triangle offense, right?
Mm-hmm.
There isn't this ball-stopping ability with Jordan. There isn't this black hole, like I need to dominate the ball every possession. That is why I prefer Jordan. It is that ability to kill you on ball, certainly, but also to do it off ball and to do it within the flow of the offense and to leave the defense completely helpless. Yes, MJ could pass the ball. He could be a really good playmaker when he needed to. In the 91 finals, when the guy averages 11 assists per game, right? You can look at that. And I get the Lakers are depleted relative to, how healthy their roster was. But Jordan did that. And Jordan would just leave you with that helpless feeling because there was nothing you could do with the guy. He is an elite jump shooter. But if you sell out on the jump shot, he is going to blow by you and get to the basket and had an array and a bevy of finishes at his disposal. If you didn't sell out on the jumper, he was just going to hit it right in your jaw. If you sold out on him at the rim with a double team or a triple team, he could find shooters and guys who could finish. And at the end of the day, to me, this stretch from 90 to 93, it is the perfect blend to me of athleticism, strength, and jump shooting, all in totality. There's just nothing you could do with MJ, man. To me, he is completely untouchable. And I think you said it really well, man. You put a gun to my head, you ask me who I would most want to start an offense with, it's Jordan. And I just think he could do it so easily on ball, off ball. I think he's the total package, man. And I don't know. I don't know what argument you could make to me about Jokic that I guess it would have to be like a strength argument, but I don't know.
I think the argument would be what he does in terms of the offensive rebounding, the screening, right? The stuff like that. All of the different ways that you can run offense through him. I think that would be the argument. And then the hyper efficiency in the regular season, right? Combined with like the brilliant processing. You'd say all of that in totality is more valuable. And I think in the regular season it is. And then you get to the playoffs against the best of the best defense and the best athletes and the most physical teams that are scheming for you to their utmost potential. And I just couldn't take anybody over MJ when I really thought about it. Like, he's the GOAT scorer by so far. We talked about this when we did our top 10 scorers, but I went with 90 to 93 for MJ. And the reason I didn't include 89, even though, I mean, the numbers that year are as ridiculous as any, especially the efficiency, is I just think once you get to 1990 and Phil Jackson is there and MJ buys into the triangle and he's a little bit stronger, he starts keeping turnovers lower. And I just think like that's when he has the most polished all around approach. And honestly has a great playoff series against the Pistons in 1990. The notion that, oh my God, he had to figure them out. It's just all because his teammates sucked. Like, it truly is. MJ tore up the Pistons. It didn't matter. He wasn't scared of them, even though they fouled him every time and they were this all-time great defense. He more than carried his weight. It's just the team around him, they couldn't make a shot. But in the playoffs, in this span, 33 league-adjusted points per 75. You're talking about 3 more points than any other player to ever play this game on plus 5% relative true shooting. He is the GOAT rim pressuring, rim finishing guard. I think when you talk about just an athlete who stands out against their peers, MJ has a case for being the greatest. His first step relative to the NBA at that time might be the greatest ever. His agility, his body control in the air, his balance in the paint, all that stuff is just absolutely ridiculous. The touch, the length, the size of his hands, just all these things combining to make him like the perfect rim finisher. And obviously the bounce, like just the fact that his hang time is one of the craziest things, how he could manipulate that as a scorer at the rim, but also as a mid-range shooter, just hovering above people and making shots over the top. And we talked about his mid-range volume in the top 10 shooters episode. It's absolutely ridiculous. And that's why I think he's the GOAT ever. Like, the guy could just make 6 mid-range shots a game at a 50% clip. That's absurd on top of what he was doing pressuring the rim. And he could do it with such an elite combination of on and off ball scoring. He's such an elite off ball player within the context of the triangle, especially, and a great cutter too. And my favorite thing about MJ, not my favorite thing, but the thing that I think is most underrated about him is his supremely positive impact on the margins. The fact that he is probably the best offensive rebounding guard ever, averaging 1.5 offensive rebounds per 75 possessions. Better offensive rebounder than LeBron James. Like, I don't think that gets talked about enough, that he's 3 inches shorter and yet is delivering such value in that way. He is a GOAT-level turnover suppressor. Again, when a guy can score 35 points per game and he's turning the ball over 2.5 times a game, what that does for you in the possession game, that leanness, like, it's just such a meaningful asset to team offense that doesn't get discussed enough. It's a legitimate advantage over a LeBron James, for example. And then, of course, the off-ball stuff is an advantage for him over so many people. I think that when you talk about the greatest playmakers in NBA history, that being the shots that you create for your teammates, the 3 guys who leap most in that category compared to the top 10 passers, right? So the guys who are directly creating shots for their teammates with a pass is a different thing. I'm talking about just in totality, be that through passing or scoring threat, shifting coverages, who creates the most value for their teammates. The three guys who take the biggest leap in value there are Steph Curry, Shaquille O'Neal, and Michael Jordan. I mean, his scoring threat was so nonstop from all over the floor. Such a good off-ball mover, too. And the way that enhanced team offense, like when we talk about these greatest runs of team offense, I mentioned the Suns with Nash, and I mentioned the Lakers with Magic. Michael Jordan led 4 of the top 25 relative offenses in NBA history in 91, 92, 96, and 97. It is another one of those unbelievable runs. He led 3 better relative offenses than LeBron's best ever. And I do think that matters. I think that does reflect the ceiling of building an offense around MJ with the elite off-ball value, with the hyper efficiency. This guy, his offenses were lapping the field, lapping them as much as anybody ever really. And when he leaves, 1994, the Bulls are still a good team, but that's because their defense is still elite. Offensively, they fall off from this 3-year run of historic offense to being the median NBA offense. They experience a 7-point drop-off in offensive rating just with MJ leaving. So that impact is so massive. And the scoring floor, considering the playoffs, I think is the highest that we've ever seen. The consistency. Again, regular season, I think it's probably Shai at this point, but MJ's volume was so inevitable. The efficiency was so elite. And I do love how lean the game is. I mean, when you can have that sort of off-ball value, when you can have that sort of stylistic malleability, versatility, and have this massive scoring volume and inevitable impact no matter what, and there's no defensive coverage that can take you out of your game, I just can't deny that. Like, there was no way to give MJ trouble offensively. People might say, oh, we'll force him to beat you as a decision maker and a playmaker. He did it. The 91 finals, he averages 11 assists a game. His assist numbers overall in this time, they're quite good. I mean, he's averaging an assist and a half less per 75 possessions than LeBron. Like, the gap there is not as big as some people make it out to be. And so the only conceivable knock on MJ is he averaged 32, 7, and 6 on plus 3% relative true shooting in 1990 against the Pistons. And he pushed that team 7, that team that was way better, that all-time great defense. And in game 7, he gave you 31, 8, and 9. And his teammates shot 15 of 63. They were under 24%. Like, this notion that MJ wasn't already the best player in the world or that he had stuff to figure out. Like, no, dude. MJ was MJ. MJ was a basketball god in 1990. 1991, I think, is the best single season ever. And I do think, obviously, MJ versus Jokic as a player has never been a conversation because of defense. Purely offensively, I think Jokic can reclaim the title with a dominant playoff run, but the inevitability of MJ, and some of it is just athleticism. The fact that when you're the best athlete on the floor at all times, you're never going to get overwhelmed in that way. And another advantage MJ has over Jokic because of his athleticism is transition value. And honestly, that's true for Steph and LeBron also. They're better transition players than Jokic. But with MJ in the half court, when you can get past anybody with that first step, and you can't be crowded in the half court like a Jokic because you can attack so quickly and you initiate from the perimeter and you have this all-time great over-the-top shot making, it just always translated. It really did, and it's really that simple. I think the results support this. So we have the exact same top 6. We literally went the exact same order. That being said, let's run through the top 10 overall, Logan. What do you have for the people?
In my 10 spot, I have 64 to 66 Jerry West. In my 9 spot, I have 23 to 26 SGA. In my 8 spot, I have 2000 to 02 Shaq. In my 7 spot, I have 77 to 80 Kareem. In my 6 spot, I have 05 to 07 Steve Nash. In my 5 spot, I have 84 to 87 Magic. In my 4 spot, I have 16 to 18 LeBron. In my 3 spot, I have 21 to 23 Steph Curry. In my 2 spot, I have 23 to 26 Jokic. And in my 1 spot, I have 90 to 93 MJ.
That's interesting that you went with 84 to 87 for Magic. I feel like the scoring from 87 to 90 and the ability to carry those offenses gave him the nod to me. So we don't have the same peaks. I do disagree with you choosing 21 to 23 as Steph's peak years. But alas, I think we've debated enough for the day, Logan. So In my 10 spot, I had Kareem from 74 to 77. At 9, Oscar from 62 to 66. Number 8, Larry Bird from 84 to 88. Number 7, Shaq from 2000 to 02. Number 6 was Nash 05 to 07. 5, Magic 87 to 90. 4, LeBron 16 to 18. 3, Steph Curry 16 to 19. 2, Nikola Jokic 23 to 26. And 1, Michael Jordan 1990 to 1993. I hope that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is on this list. I couldn't help myself. I had to say it. I hope that he gets here. I think that he can get here. There are a lot of guys who were very difficult to keep off this list. There is so much great offensive talent in NBA history, and especially in the 21st century, man. It's just ridiculous. So we hope you guys enjoyed this one. Let us know where you agree. Let us know where you disagree. And we will see you guys soon. We've got one more of these all-time ranking shows coming next week. We got to talk about some defense, and we've got a great guest coming on for that one, so stay tuned for that. And, of course, we've got another show coming on Friday, just regular style about the NBA. And we also have a couple video essays that recently came out. I did one on the Celtics. I did one on the Hornets yesterday, so check those out on our YouTube channel if you so please. You can find all of our content there, all of our long-form content, and you can listen to all of our shows across all audio platforms. You can also follow us on social, of course, for all of our viral daily content there. And you can join our Discord if you want to be part of our community and chat with the gang over there. So with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I've been Carson Brabber.
I've been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sash.